The interior of the car was clean, cozy, and smelled of lemon from the aromatizer. Light music was coming from the stereo, and behind the wheel sat a pleasant young blonde in a cap. She was waiting for the next customer to come out. Alice worked in a taxi not so long ago, only 3 months, and for this short time she had time to feel all the peculiarities of this difficult job. Finally, a middle-aged man ran up to the car, opened the door, and wanted to get in. But when he saw Alice, he suddenly became indignant. "It's come to this. Where is the world going? A woman at the wheel, and, as I see it, yesterday's schoolgirl. If I had known, I would have called another taxi service, but it's too late. I have to catch my train in 10 minutes. Well, I'm imagining the journey." Alice had heard that many times before, especially from men, so she wasn't offended at all. She looked at her wristwatch and said cheerfully, "Good afternoon. It's 7:30. Shall we go? Time's up." The man grudgingly buckled himself in, and Alice confidently took off. At first, the passenger looked incredulously at the driver and at the road, as if calculating whether this girl would reach the station in time. But then he abruptly changed his opinion. Alice maneuvered so confidently, dashing into the empty rows, quickly rebuilt. Then she took a shortcut through unremarkable yards and managed to drive through a narrow street where there was no traffic jam. She was smiling and humming a simple tune. She was on time, second to second. The man was very happy, kissed her hand, paid the fare, and even gave her a generous tip. And in parting, he said, "I take it back. Can I have your card? You're a driver from God, thank you. I was so afraid of missing the train." Alice only laughed and replied, "All the best. Have a good trip." But the next drunken party upset her a little. The guy was raging, singing in the cabin, and Alice reprimanded him. After all, if this debauchee spills alcohol on the seat, then for a long time the unpleasant smell will stand in the cabin. It would be a shame to see people, but the passenger was very offended, began to mock her, and the girls next to him only laughed. Alice then slyly and sternly said, "One more stupid joke," and I pressed the panic button. "The door locks automatically. My friends from the taxi will be here in a flash, and they're not fragile girls like me. They'll quickly explain how to behave." The boy began to look round. Instantly, he quieted down and didn't bully anymore. When everyone got out and paid, Alice pulled to the side of the road, switched off the engine and exhaled. It wasn't really a button, and neither were her friends. She'd taken a big risk, but it had worked. You see a lot of things on a shift, hear a lot of stories. It's mind-boggling. Still, she liked the job, and it was not in her predicament to choose. Alice grew up in a small village. Mom worked as a shop assistant, Dad an engineer at the factory. Just a simple family. They lived poorly, but friendly. Alice adored her daddy. She ran to him with all her legs when he came home from work. He always brought her bunny presents, patiently listened to all her joys and sorrows, affectionately pressed to himself and called Ray. This period of her childhood the girl remembered as the happiest. But then everything changed dramatically. Dad loved winter fishing, and once fell through the ice, strong and long coughing. Sick and stubbornly did not want to go to the doctor. Mom bought antibiotics and tried to treat him at home on her own. And when he became very bad and Mom called an ambulance, it was too late. He died 2 days later in hospital from pneumonia. This terrible grief shook the whole family. Alice withdrew, cried all the time, and desperately longed for her daddy. Mom also changed a lot. From grief, she became nervous and irritable. Money was not enough. A year later, she brought in her stepfather, Uncle Ashley. The opinion of a young daughter, of course, no one thought to even ask. Alice immediately disliked this unpleasant man, nor did he show any warm feelings for her. Very quickly got used to it, began to manage, command, and nag the girl. He also liked to drink on Fridays. In the evening, the same unpleasant mates came to him. They drank alcohol, shouted loudly, and watched football. Mom tried to make it stop, but it didn't. Uncle Ashley shoved her one day and said sternly, "If you mention it again, I'll leave. You'll have to raise your own. Who needs you with a trailer like that? Be glad you have a man now." Mom had completely given up. She got quiet, faded. It was like something inside her had broken. But she didn't chase stepdad away. She tolerated his drunken antics and rudeness, his neglect of his stepdaughter. Why? She didn't know why. She was just afraid of being alone and not needed. But Alice did not tolerate. She often fought with her stepfather. Sometimes she left the house, spent long hours wandering with her friends on the street, just to avoid seeing the face of that nasty Uncle Ashley. Stepdad had a car, an old Toyota. And somehow he decided to teach his stepdaughter not only how to drive, but also how to work with the car, not out of the goodness of his heart, that she drove him with his drinking buddies where necessary, and he could drink, relax. At first, Alice took it without enthusiasm. She was afraid of her stepfather, but soon she liked driving so much that she got involved in this business with her head. She could spend hours with the boys in her stepfather's garage. Together they rebuilt the car on the screws. And by the age of 17, Alice was racing as well as an experienced driver. And soon she got her license without any problems. She passed her exams brilliantly from the first time. Driving was a kind of an outlet for the girl. At the wheel, she forgot about all the problems and enjoyed herself. Stepfather was also only to the advantage. After all, the stepdaughter did not twist all the time under her feet and did not bother his eyes. It did not irritate him so much. When Alice was 18, she began to look after the son of the chairman, Alex. Between young people immediately arose feelings. First love. Alex courted beautifully, gave the bride armfuls of flowers, drove to the city by car at night, passionately kissed her. Stepfather already rubbed his hands. Look, Alice, do not miss such a groom. I have long wanted to be related to the chairman. At least there will be some use of you will be, wretched. The girl herself dreamed of leaving her home, which had become unbearable. She was ready even to please her mother-in-law, just to avoid seeing her stepfather. But then Alex's parents interfered in their relationship with the groom. The chairman, having learnt with whom his only heir is making love, stood on the fringes. Where is it that we Stuarts are related to these beggars? It is a shame and a disgrace. They have no house, no yard, no dowry. His parents immediately hustled and found a suitable match for Alex, the farmer's daughter Linda. The girl was 2 heads taller than Alice and had the figure of a woman. She was dressed fashionably, had a lot of her father's money, and quickly took Alex in her stride. And he, like an obedient calf, did not really resist, accustomed to listen to his father in everything, and did not dare to contradict him. The groom despicably betrayed Alice, disgraced her for the whole village, and married Linda. The girl sobbed day and night. Her mum felt sorry for her. But the stepfather went completely off the rails. Every day he'd mock her on purpose. What? You left her. Left her. Who will need you now, you spoiled brat? You fool. You couldn't even keep a man near you. On the day of Alex's wedding, Alice could not stand it, packed a suitcase, and went to the city, literally to nowhere. She couldn't stay at home anymore. It was so nauseating here. The girl hoped that everything would be different there. A new life would begin. But even here, the naive girl fell for the tricks of another scoundrel. Only she rented herself a corner, a small room, settled in a kiosk selling fruit, as immediately behind her, as glued, began to follow a new suitor. Stephen conquered Alice with his confidence and charisma. He told her that he was selling car parts, drove a comfortable car, and rented a flat in the center. The man was 10 years older than his bride. Honestly admitted that he was in jail, stumbled, but not for murder or something terrible, but for fraud. It wasn't his fault. He was set up by his former employer. Stephen assured Alice that he was done and would never return to the zone again. After all, he has a whole new life now. The groom, so beautifully courted, took Alice to the cinema and restaurants, dressed her like a doll. He spared no expense on her. They planned how they would get married, how they would raise their children together and live happily ever after. The naive girl unconditionally believed her fiancé. Soon she moved in with him and sincerely thought that she was very lucky. She, of course, a little embarrassed that sometimes Stephen in the evening someone called someone, and he went away on business for an hour or two. To her questions, he only waved her off. Never mind, it's business. Go to bed, I'll be there soon. It was Stephen who insisted that Alice quit her job. They say there is nothing heavy boxes to carry and account to the owner for every penny. He really brought a lot of money. The girl was even surprised that he was paid such a solid salary. The couple was preparing for the wedding. Nothing foreshadowed trouble, but on one far from beautiful day, Alice's life collapsed. It was early weekend morning. The couple was sweetly sleeping in the arms when the door of the flat began to ring and knock insistently. Sleepy Alice, yawning, reluctantly got out of bed and went to open the door without even looking through the peephole. When the police officers entered the flat and showed her their ID cards, she was stunned and froze in place with her mouth open. She was asleep. The girl asked, "Hello, wait, who are you here to see? Did something happen? I don't think we violated anything." A tall, gray-haired operative came into the bedroom without asking and started pushing Stephen. The other, younger man replied, "You may not have done anything wrong, Your fiancé, on the other hand, was selling stolen car parts. He's also suspected of stealing several cars. Citizen Davis, wake up. 5 minutes to pack up and get out. You're coming with us, and I think you're going to stay with us for a long time. Stephen was rushed to the window 6 stories up, to the ground quickly, took away the ardor to escape. It would no longer succeed. He began to dress in silence. The silence was broken by Alice. She was crying and trying to find out something. Stephen, is it true? Didn't you say you were done with crime, that you were working in a firm? We're getting married in a month. How can that be? Tell me this is a mistake. I'm begging you. You can't do this to me. The man didn't look up. He was ashamed. He answered honestly. I'm sorry, kitten. That's just the way it is. I wanted you to live like a queen. To live like a queen. The first did my best for you. Alice sobbed, covering her face with her hands. For my sake. Do you hear yourself, Stephen? You blatantly lied to me. If I had known you were bringing home stolen money, I would never have lived with you. I wanted a real family. And you. The man was led away in handcuffs. Alice sobbed in the middle of the room. She was devastated. Betrayed again by her fiancé. Everything was repeating itself in a circle. She whispered through her tears, God, why did I have to go through all this? I truly loved Stephen, trusted him. I wanted children from him. And he. Why did he do this to me? Why am I so unlucky? How will I ever live again? While Alice was frantically looking for a job and trying to pull herself together, she began to feel nauseous. All day long, she felt lethargic and broken. At first, she put it down to stress. But when her cycle became irregular, she decided to see a doctor. The gynecologist shocked her. Pregnancy, 7 weeks. The girl was terrified. That's all she needed now. Her first thought was to have an abortion before it was too late, and erase Stephen from her memory forever. She just couldn't imagine raising a child on her own. But the stern elderly nurse gave her a hard look and threw her a sharp look. Don't be daft, girl, you'll regret it later. We have seen crowds of such desperate people here, and then they go to the doorstep. They can't get pregnant or give birth. Go on, think about it. There's still time. And Alice changed her mind. She was lying at home, listening to herself, and suddenly realized that she had almost made an irreparable mistake. After all, she already had a human being inside her, even if he is still the size of a grain. So what? Soon enough, a little heart will be beating. The baby will push. And then a little boy or a little girl will be born, and she won't be alone anymore. She'll love her child, take care of him. Who cares who the father is? The main thing is that the mom was good. These positive thoughts cheered her up and gave her strength. And she began to look for a job with even greater zeal. The money was disappearing before her eyes. Soon there would be no money to pay the rent. That's when she came across an advert with a vacancy for taxi drivers at the taxi park Vesna. The girl did not hesitate and went for an interview. She had no doubts about her skills, license in hand. And what if she was lucky? The boss laughed at her at first. Sweetheart, you're not mistaken address. You're a 2 tops from the pot, like Thumbelina. But what kind of a taxi driver are you? And if you get stuck in the mud or your car breaks down, who's gonna fix it? Didn't your dad give you a license, or did you buy it yourself? No, I don't want any more trouble. I'm sorry. It's not without reason they say that a woman behind the wheel is like a monkey with a grenade. Alice didn't move from her seat, answered directly, looking into his eyes. I know how to fix cars and drive perfectly well. Let me at least try. Give me a test, then you'll judge me. It's not fair. If you're a frail woman, you're not a human being, or she's only obliged to embroider cross-stitch. And if I like the road and driving too, what can I do? Mr. Oliver grinned and summoned the mechanic from the garage. Matthew, give the young lady a breakdown on that 7. Let her find the fault without any prompting and fix it herself, and we'll see what she can do. Think of something more complicated. The elderly mechanic fiddled in the dirty box for a long time. Then he came out and gestured to Alice. Here you go, young lady. Well, drive out of the garage and drive around the car park. Identify the breakdown and then fix it. If you manage to do all this, I'll believe that the driver. Alice got behind the wheel, drove out easily, took a ride. There was a distinctive knocking noise from behind. She listened for it. And when she stopped, she responded like this. It's all clear. The rear brake pads have worn off. Do you have new ones? She quickly jacked the car up on both sides, removed 2 wheels and changed the pads, put it all back together quick and easy. The men whistled. The girl wiped her hands clean of brake fluid and smiled proudly. Well, did I pass the exam? I can rebuild an engine if I have to. Mr. Oliver shook her hand and said, "Convinced, I'll take it. Give me your papers, Alice, and let's go to registration. I hope I don't regret my decision." So Alice became a taxi driver. She kept silent about her pregnancy. Her belly would not be visible for a long time, and it is possible to save some money for childbirth and everything necessary for the baby. At first, her colleagues did not take her seriously, often joking, but the girl worked hard. The clients didn't complain, and over time, everyone fell silent. Accustomed to such a partner, girls. Today, Alice dressed up from the morning very carefully. She twisted her long wheat hair on curlers and arranged it in beautiful curls. She wore a beautiful cream-colored suit and slip-on shoes. She had a special order. The girl would drive the newlyweds on their wedding day in a spacious car. The wealthy bride demanded a limousine and a driver from the taxi company, necessarily a young girl in festive clothes. Such a whim. But it was only to Alice's advantage. She was going to earn a decent salary and perhaps tips, and she could use the extra money now. On the way, the girl got into a small traffic jam. She looked around bored and suddenly noticed a thin, poorly dressed grandfather trying unsuccessfully to get on the bus. The window of the car was open, and Alice could hear the dialogue between the grandfather and the driver very well. "Please, can I go to the end of the bus? I'm only 5 rubles short. I will take your route again tomorrow and return it. It's freezing outside. I want to get warm." The irritated driver only muttered, "Get out of here, old man. I won't let you in. If you don't have any money, then walk. Am I going to put mine down for you? Do I even need it?" Alice was so indignant, such disrespect to an old man. She couldn't stand it, stopped nearby and ran up to that very bus, handed the old man a note. "Here, please take this for the fare. I'm sorry, I'm in a hurry. I'm in a great hurry to get to work. I would have driven you myself." And then she said reproachfully to the driver, "And you, man, should be ashamed. You should drive pensioners at a discount, not poke elderly people and be rude." She waved to the grandfather and ran to the car, and he shouted after her, "Thank you, honey. God bless you." Alice smiled and felt good that she had helped the man. She honorably fulfilled all her obligations on the delivery. First, she took the newlyweds together with their relatives to the registry office. Then she drove them around the city for a long time for photo shoots. The final point was an expensive restaurant. She was generously paid, and she wanted to go back to the taxi park. But the guests and hosts of the party asked her to stay. "Alice, our joy, where are you going? Come to our table. You are a dear guest for us. You'll eat, have a rest. You've been driving all day, and here you'll have a bit of fun. We'll pay for your time. Don't even worry." The girl hesitated briefly. It was uncomfortable to refuse, and she could use a little rest. She closed the limousine and was about to enter the restaurant when suddenly she saw a motorcade of jeeps. Apparently important guests, she thought. An elderly, intelligent man in a suit and an expensive jacket got out of the first car. His appearance seemed familiar to her. The girl looked closely. Oh my goodness, it was that poorly dressed thin old man to whom she had paid the fare today. But how could this be possible? What kind of reincarnation? Alice smiled at him and went over to say hello, but the old man raised an eyebrow in surprise and asked, "Why are you looking at me like that?" "Young lady, mistaken. It happens." Alice was embarrassed and did not argue. She only mumbled, "I'm sorry," and went inside the restaurant. She even felt a little offended. Why did her grandfather pretend not to recognize her? After all, she had genuinely helped him. The girl sat down at a table. A waiter immediately ran up to her and began to serve her politely. Everything was unusually tasty. Live music, fun. The girl looked at the young people and the guests out of idle interest. She liked the groom very much, such a nice, charming, and open guy. No bragging and boasting. But the bride Cassandra did not leave the best impression. Outwardly, she was impeccably beautiful, and the figure, and the dress, and the face insanely beautiful. But how arrogant and conceited she was. She acted haughty, cool, careless, looked down on everyone. She was always dissatisfied with something. She was capricious, like a spoilt brat. Alice listened to the conversation of the guests sitting next to her and learned a lot of interesting things. It turns out that the elderly man in the Jeep, this is the native grandfather of the groom, a famous businessman, Peterson. He raised him himself. Alice was even more surprised. Why did he beg the driver to give him a lift on the bus if he himself drives a Jeep and has a business? Yes, the rich have their own quirks, Alice thought, and began to slowly get ready to leave. After all, she was a stranger at this party. She had a rest, and that was enough. It's time to leave. Alice went out of the restaurant, and then she was called by the same grandfather businessman. He took her aside and began to explain everything. "Wait, young lady. I need to talk to you. I'll introduce myself first. My name is Carl Peterson. I'm sorry, Alice, I had to pretend we were strangers in front of the guards and guests. In fact, I recognized you, of course. You must think I'm out of my mind, pretending to be poor and infirm, asking for a lift without money. No, that's just how I test my drivers sometimes. I am the owner of a transport company, and I make sure that my staff follow all the instructions and regulations I give them. I just recently gave an order to drive all pensioners at a discount or free of charge. But this cheapskate persistently did not take me, even though I lacked only a little for a ticket. At first, I involved my employees from the department, but always the same report. Everything is in order. There are no violations. The anonymous letters are pouring in. People are complaining. So I decided to check everything personally. As a result of today's inspection, this driver has already been fired, and thank you for helping me out. It's obvious that you have a good heart." Alice shook her head and replied, "Well, it all makes sense to me now. Business is a complicated thing. That's your grandson getting married today, isn't it? Congratulations. I wish the young ones much happiness, and I wish you great grandchildren." Carl sighed and became sad. "Thank you, Alice, but if there were anything to congratulate, I raised my grandson myself. Kevin is a good boy. He graduated from university with honors and is actively involved in work. But I don't like his fiancée, Cassandra. She's already been married. Now she's got a grandson. She's soft, but I don't believe her. I know in my heart she's a phony. I tried to talk Kevin out of the wedding, but he wouldn't go through with it. He loves her more than life. Well, we'll see what happens. Alice, here's my card. In case you ever need help, don't hesitate to call. I'll help you in any way I can." Alice nodded, slipped the card into her pocket, said goodbye warmly to the businessman, and left for the taxi park. She had no idea that very soon that very business card would come in handy. One day, the girl, as usual, was traveling around the city and dropping off clients. She was picking up 2 women in the evening near a shopping center. Suddenly, she saw Cassandra at the entrance, the same bride at whose wedding she had been a cabbie. Cassandra was shamelessly and passionately kissing some mustachioed man. He was groping her unceremoniously. He was clearly not her husband. Both of them were in such a rage that they were completely oblivious to their surroundings. Alice was stunned. She felt so unpleasant and even resentful of Kevin. How could she cheat on her husband so shamelessly and brazenly? After all, it had only been a couple of weeks since the wedding. So Cassandra really doesn't love Kevin at all. Her clients came to the car, and she drove them to the address. The women were quite tipsy, laughing, wondering how such a young girl could work in a taxi. Alice answered them something, but her thoughts were far away. The girl was tormented by doubts. What to do? Call Carl and tell everything as it is, or stay out of other people's relationships? After all, in essence, it was none of her business. But on the other hand, Kevin had looked at his bride with such loving eyes at the wedding. It's clearly not a marriage of convenience. So he loves her. He doesn't know anything about it. And she's cheating on him. What if I'm prying into someone else's life for nothing? Then I'll be blamed for everything. All evening and night, Alice could not get out of her head that scene with Cassandra's treason. And in the morning, she made up her mind and dialed the businessman's number. She began to explain in confused tones. "Hello, Carl, it's your taxi driver, Alice, bothering you. Remember me?" The man perked up and replied, "Good morning. Alice, of course I remember you. What's wrong? Do you need any help?" The girl exhaled and made up her mind. "Rather not for me, but for your grandson. You know, I was dropping off some clients yesterday and I happened to see your daughter-in-law, Cassandra. She was making out with some mustachioed bloke, about 10 years older. I know it's none of my business, and it's probably not nice of me to pry into other people's lives, but I thought I'd give you a warning, and then you can do what you want. I'm sorry again for bringing you bad news this morning." Without waiting for a reply, Alice hung up the phone. Her heart was pounding furiously, as if she had done something reprehensible. She sighed heavily and tried to get ready for work, still worrying whether she had done the right thing. Another couple of weeks passed. It all happened after her night shift at the taxi company. She had a legitimate day off. She wanted to stay in bed longer and not be in a hurry to get up in the morning. But at 0900 hours, the doorbell rang. Then there was a quiet knock. The girl didn't want to wake up from her slumber and get out of the warm bed. She could hardly bring herself to get up and went to open the door. putting on a dressing gown. When she saw Carl and Kevin paraded on the doorstep with a bouquet of flowers and a huge cake, she was dumbfounded. "Oh," she exclaimed. "Oh, hello," you go into the kitchen. "Excuse me a moment," and ran off to the bathroom to clean herself up. She was embarrassed to be caught looking so sleepy and disheveled. 10 minutes later, she came out fresh and ruddy. The guests were seated at the table. Alice bustled about, putting the kettle on, slicing sandwiches, opening the cake. "Alice, you'll have to forgive us for coming so early. We didn't even think you poor thing was sleeping off your shift," Carl said. "It's no big deal. But what I didn't expect to see was you. But I'm always happy to have visitors. We'll have tea now." "Is something wrong? How did you find me?" "I didn't leave you an address." Carl admired this shyly hospitable hostess. "Alice, please. It's not a problem to find out the address now. And Kevin and I came to say thank you. You saved our family from disaster, you might say. After you called me, I had everyone on alert. My security guys did a background check on my sister-in-law, and some suspicious facts came up. Remember, I mentioned once that Cassandra had been married before, but she didn't like to talk about it, and for good reason. Her wealthy husband passed away a couple of weeks after the wedding under very strange circumstances from severe poisoning. Not 6 months later, she was back to wooing the next sucker. That would be my Kevin, sadly. We found the same mustachioed man Cassandra was having an affair with. You were right. It turned out to be her accomplice and lover. We nailed this mate hard, and he came clean. It turns out the scheme was simple. This con man was looking for single young guys with money and put Cassandra in their bed. She'd charmed the client in no time. Next thing you know, it's a wedding, and then they would eliminate the young spouse, and voila, Cassandra is an unhappy but very rich widow. The scheme worked perfectly. If it hadn't been for your call and the warning, Kevin would have been next. So from my grandson and I, thank you so much, and a little present." Alice shook her head. Gee, what a way to play on a man's feelings, to lie to him, to pretend. Though why am I surprised? I fell into the trap twice myself. Now I'm dealing with it. Kevin joined the conversation. "I don't know how it happened, but I fell in love with Cassandra. It was like she cast a spell on me when Grandpa told me everything. I didn't even believe it at first. Cassandra did go out that night, but she said she was going to stay with a friend who was passing through town. It's been a while. We'll talk about our own things, women's things. I didn't even suspect a thing. I trusted her, and that snake was having an affair behind my back. I feel so bad, so bad. How could I have made such a mistake in a man? What happened to you? Would you care to share? How did you even get into a taxi? It's rare to meet a young girl behind the wheel." Alice, not expecting herself, told them everything about her first love and betrayal of her fiancé, about her former partner, who had been in prison and was back there again, and about her pregnancy. At the end, she added sadly, "As you can see, I am also a bad judge of people, too naive and gullible. So now I will raise the baby alone. But you know, it doesn't scare me anymore. I'm saving money, putting aside enough to pay for the birth and the baby. I'll be fine." Kevin shook his head. He felt genuinely sorry for this good, kind girl. It was going to be hard on her. After the story Alice had told him, his grief didn't seem so great. After all, the girl wasn't sad. Carl got up and said goodbye. "You know what, Alice? My grandson and I take over your patronage. We will communicate, be friends, support each other. Do you mind? You are very pleasant to me as a person. I feel like I'm talking to my daughter. I don't even want to leave. But I realize you need to rest, get some sleep. So Kevin and I will go." Alice smiled. "You know, somehow I feel so easy and comfortable with you too, as if we've known each other for years. I don't mind. Let's be friends. Thank you for the beautiful bouquet and for the cake." "It's my pleasure," Alice said. They said goodbye warmly and went their separate ways. Life went on as usual. Kevin kicked Cassandra out and divorced her. She was angry and resentful. She hated the taxi driver who had ruined all her plans and decided to take revenge on her at any cost so that she would always remember how to meddle in other people's lives. That day, Alice returned from the last order at the second hour of the night and did not take her car to the taxi park as usual. She had to go out again in the morning. She parked the car in the courtyard. It was always quiet and not crowded. The girl was very tired and, having taken a shower, immediately fell asleep. It seemed that she just closed her eyes and the alarm clock rang again. There was no strength to get up at all. Some anger and fatigue came on. Alice thought, "God, well, when will I rest normally? What kind of life is this?" Everything on the fly, on the run, and the baby will be born. Again, not to rest will be sleepless nights and nappies. It's like a total hopelessness. No one to lean on, no one to cry to. Her stepfather, if he finds out, will start nagging her again that she was a loser, got pregnant, and now she'll have to deal with it herself. And I didn't want to upset my mom. She's already having a hard time with him. The girl got up with all her might. She got herself together, poured coffee into a thermos, and went back to her orders. She had to stop by the taxi company first, report for yesterday's shift, and hand over the proceeds. However, when she started up and just pulled onto the busy motorway, she realized to her horror that the brakes didn't work. Or rather, they didn't work at all. Alice was in a panic. She was rolling downhill by inertia. Cars were coming from behind and in front. There was no way to avoid an accident. And so it happened. It's a good thing the speed was low. The girl only suffered bruises and a concussion, and the other drivers weren't hurt. But she was taken to hospital anyway. She got sick on the way. Her stomach ached and a pool of blood spread under her. The girl started screaming, "Help, I'm pregnant. Save my baby. I beg you, if anything happens to him, I have no reason to live." All this, already fainting from the pain, she handed the nurse from the ambulance crew Carl's card and whispered, "Call me, tell me where I am, he'll help." The victim woke up in her room. Her arm was hooked up to the system. A slow drip was dripping. Strangely, she had no pain at all. Remembering what had happened, the girl began to feel her stomach with her other hand, trying to understand what was wrong with her. A nurse entered the room. The girl immediately started asking, "What's wrong with me and the baby? Did you save it? Am I still pregnant? Why can't I feel anything downstairs?" The medic smiled and hurried to reassure her. "Hush, hush. Calm down, please. And don't fidget. Everything is all right. The crisis has passed. We've averted the threat of miscarriage. And you absolutely cannot stand up for a while. We're monitoring your condition. Even if things get better, we need to change your lifestyle. You've driven yourself to the point of near exhaustion, and it's definitely not advisable to continue working as a taxi driver. All you need is rest and relaxation, sleep, and a healthy diet. That's the only way you'll be able to carry and give birth to a healthy baby. There's a visitor who keeps asking for you, an elderly, respectable man. Shall I let him in? Who is he to you?" Alice swallowed and nodded. "Yes, of course you can let him in. This is my closest person right now. I'm very glad he came to see me." Carl timidly entered the room, took a chair and sat down next to Alice's bed, took her hand. The palm was small, dry and cold as ice. The elderly man began. "Well, hello, Alice, you gave us all quite a scare. I got a call from the ambulance that you'd had an accident and were being taken to hospital. I rushed over. I'm glad you're better and everything's okay. So tell me, how did you get into the accident? What happened?" Alice was suddenly in tears. All her worries were pouring out of her in addition to her will. She spoke through her sobs. "I don't know myself, but I was so frightened. I have never been so scared in my life. I thought it was the end. I was going to lose the baby." And she told him about how the brakes had suddenly gone. She'd just had a full inspection the day before. Everything was working perfectly. How could this have happened? She had no idea. At the end, the woman sadly added, "I have no idea how to go on. The nurse said that working in a taxi is out of the question. I could lose the baby. I need peace. What am I going to live on then? I don't know what happened to my car. The owner will probably put me on the hook for all the restoration costs. But I swear I checked everything the day before. The brakes were working. I'd never risk going on a shift in a broken-down car. How am I going to prove it now? All in all, it's hopeless everywhere. I'm sorry I got on your nerves. You have your own life, your own problems. And here I am with my own worries." Carl's heart sank. He felt sorry for this poor girl who had got into such a mess. He shook her palm and said confidently, "So, here goes. Firstly, wipe your tears immediately and stop sobbing and winding yourself up. What are you told to do? Rest here, lie down, heal, and don't think about anything but the baby. That's your main mission right now. I'll take care of everything else myself. Let's get your car to forensics. Let them find out how it happened and why the brakes failed. I'll check your yard for cameras. I'm sure there are cameras in your yard. I'll talk to your landlord too. I'll come and tell you when I'm done. I brought you some vitamins and goodies. So you rest, come on. Everything will be all right. Trust me." Alice exhaled and smiled through her tears. "Thank you so much, Carl. You are simply my savior. You're the only person who cares about me. Even my stepdad never cared like that. Except Daddy? But he died a long time ago, and no one else wants me. Carl winked at her. You're old enough to be my granddaughter. You and Kevin are almost the same age. How could I leave my kid in the lurch? All right, I'm off. I'll see you later. If you need any medicine, call me immediately. The businessman approached the matter scrupulously and conducted a real investigation. He got an investigator he knew, examined the damaged car, and found out that the brake hose had been cut by someone. That's why the brakes were missing. It became obvious that someone wanted to simply kill Alice, and this is no joke. The girl was in real danger. She was found not guilty in that accident and opened a completely different case, convincing her to write a statement about the attempt on her life. Unfortunately, there were no cameras in the courtyard of her house, so they had to go round all the flats and interview her. That's where the testimony of a neighbor who was a dog owner helped. He was walking his dog at night. He asked to go outside for a walk. The man saw someone fiddling with a car with taxi badges. The neighbor thought that it was Alice herself and did not disturb her, hurrying home. But the girl claimed she was already fast asleep at the time. According to the cameras near the house near the pharmacy managed to track when Alice drove into her yard, and then an hour later some woman in a tracksuit and hoodie slipped in there. Only for a couple of minutes did she take it off, fixing her hair. But it was enough for Kevin and Carl to recognize her as Cassandra. Half an hour later she ran hurriedly towards the car park. It all fits. She was trying to hurt Alice and disable her car by causing an accident. The woman was arrested, hissing like a snake. I don't regret anything. Just so you know, that fool ruined my plans. Who asked her to meddle in other people's problems, to stick her nosy nose in, and she survived. She's a survivor. Kevin turned pale and clenched his fists. God, what a monster I was going to live my life with. Cassandra, do you have any humanity in you? Where is your conscience? You've brought so much grief to people, and you're unrepentant. But that's all right, you can't get away with it now. You almost killed the mother of an unborn child. That's a serious offense. In prison, you'll learn quickly what's right and wrong. One thing I don't understand. Don't you care about anything in life except your lust for money? Have you ever loved anyone? Why are you like this? Answer me. The woman grinned. What do you understand? You were born already rich. How can you understand what it is to live in poverty? I spent my entire miserable childhood dreaming of getting rich. I dreamed of being rich and rubbing everyone's nose in it. How can you live well on a waitress wage? It's a pittance. I'm a queen and the first deserve a better life. Did I love you? Of course not. I love only myself and no one else. Cassandra received the punishment she deserved for all she had done. The investigator brought up all the circumstances of her first spouse's death. Another case was opened on 2 counts at once, and her mustachioed lover this time did not go unpunished. Alice lay for 3 weeks in the ward. Fortunately, her health returned to normal. She was allowed to get up and lead a measured life. Carl and Kevin came to the discharge and took her home to her rented flat. Alice was very grateful to them for such care. It was as if they had become her family. They all sat down to dinner together. Then they drank tea with sweets. The hostess took out her album, which she had brought from home, and began to show the guests the photos. This is my mum. That's my stepfather next to her. I don't like him so much. For some reason he didn't accept me. Thank you for at least not raising his hand. That's one thing I'm grateful to him for. He's the one who taught me how to drive a car and drive it. You see, it came in handy. And this is my favorite daddy, Walter. I've been saving his picture. I remember how much he loved me, how he held me close, how he called me doll and bunny. It's a shame he died so young. I still miss him. That's my daddy holding me in his arms. That's him as a little boy. It's an old photo, black and white. I don't give it to anyone, and I keep it. He looks so funny, his ears sticking out and his bonnet up. Carl clutched at his heart. He stared at the pictures for a long time, especially the one of Walter as a child, and then he began to faint. God, this is unbelievable. But Walter is my son. I have that same picture at home too. So you're my own granddaughter, Alice, you know? And Kevin is your paternal brother. I can't believe it. But how? There's no such coincidence. Kevin was also clapping his eyes and didn't understand anything. How could it be so? The elderly businessman began to tell the story of his youth. My wife, Veronica, and I raised our only son in love and care. He knew no denial of anything, studied at the best school. Then at university, he was attracted to girls early on, changed girlfriends often. He was a real heartbreaker, and every time he told us that this was the love of his life. One day he brought home Megan, a nice, modest, pretty girl from a simple family. We liked her so much, we all looked after her beautifully. We were getting married. Megan soon became pregnant. Kevin, her favorite grandson, was born. They got married. But one day, Megan called Veronica and me, sobbing, to tell us that Walter had left home for good. Turns out he'd been having an affair with another woman, Vanessa. She was pregnant too. Rumor has it she had a daughter. He even managed to secretly divorce Megan and marry the other one. I had a big fight with my son. I didn't approve or understand his frivolous behavior. How could anyone do such a thing? Ruin a family. Abandon your own little son. A beautiful and clever wife. I was indignant. I was ashamed of Walter. But my son kept saying that he only loved Vanessa now, that he had fallen out of love with Megan, that there was nothing he could do about it. So I stripped him of everything and told him not to come back to our house. You could say that I denied my son. I thought that he would be afraid of it, come to his senses and return to the family. But that, alas, never happened. We took Megan and our grandson in, surrounded them with as much attention as we could. But unfortunately, all this stress has undermined her already poor health. And a year later, Megan died unexpectedly. So beautiful and so young. It's so scary. I cried at her funeral, blamed it on Walter. I didn't want to know anything about him. I just cut him out of my life and put all my attention on raising my grandson. We told Kevin that his parents died in another city. We couldn't tell him the truth. I was ashamed of my son. I found out about Walter's death 4 years later, of course. People I knew told me. But the resentment was so strong that I didn't even go to his funeral, and I didn't want to know anything about the fate of his family. I know it was stupid and cruel of me, but I realized it only after many years. And then, suddenly, I found my granddaughter. I can't even believe it. Kevin listened in shock. He was silent for a long time, and then he said, "I'm not mad at you at all, Grandpa. On the contrary, I'm grateful that you've been both my mom and dad all these years. I can imagine how hard it was for you to carry such a burden on your soul, and I don't blame my father. Who knows how he felt when he was going from one woman he loved to another. I feel sorry for Mom, though. Thank you, Grandpa, for my cloudless, happy childhood. You gave me your whole soul, and I felt it. And I'm very happy to have a sibling. It's not for nothing that the three of us are so close. It's obvious. Soulmates have found the path to each other." Alice, too, could not get away from what she had heard. She threw herself around Carl's neck. "Let me hug you, Grandpa. I'm very happy that I finally have some real relatives. But you have to wonder how it is in life. Everything is so intertwined, so twisted. Mom never told me about any of this, of course. She really loved my father very much, and after his death, she never got over him. She faded away, became like a dead person, and she put up with that nasty stepfather, Uncle Ashley, just so she wouldn't be alone. Often she would sneak away from her stepfather to her father's grave and cry there for long periods of time, whispering something to herself. Whatever it was, for me, Daddy was and will always be the best, the most beloved in my heart. I still miss him so much." Since then, Carl and Kevin moved Alice to their mansion and took care of her. Finally, the girl slept well, rested, and stopped stressing herself with thoughts about how to live alone with the baby. Now she knew that she was not alone, that there were close, dear people, grandfather and brother. They would not abandon her, would not betray her. Just on time, without any problems, Alice gave birth to Brian, a real giant. He weighed 4 kilos. Grandpa loved his great-grandson and never let him off his hands. Kevin was also very interested in his nephew. They were also very friendly with Alice. They often had heart-to-heart talks about the most painful things, and both of them felt better. Alice decided to invite her mom to the christening. She rang her. "Hi, Mom, how are you? I've had a son. Brian, the christening is in a week. I'm inviting you to come round. We'll celebrate together. You'll get to meet your grandson. Just don't bring Uncle Ashley. I have a surprise for you." The woman was shocked. "How did you give birth? Why didn't you tell me? You didn't call me. So you're married. You didn't even invite me to the wedding. Daughter, how could it be like this? Am I a complete stranger to you?" Alice only replied, "Come, Mommy, you'll find out everything. I'll send you the address by message. I'll meet you at the railway station. I'm waiting for you." Vanessa was very worried. Her daughter spoke in riddles, but she's a grandmother now. It is so unexpected and exciting. The woman was tormented by conscience because she rarely called her daughter. They had long been estranged from each other, as if they were strangers. Vanessa knew and understood. Alice never forgave her stepfather, could not get along with him, and the woman herself rather just resigned herself to it. She was sure that no one would ever love her the way Walter did. The meeting was emotional. Alice and her mother cried on the doorstep, embracing each other. Now that Alice had experienced the joys of motherhood herself, she wanted to mend her relationship with her mother, so that the grandson knew his grandmother and communicated with her, and the stepfather. God with him, do not need to think about him. Vanessa rushed to the cradle where Brian was asleep. She stared at him, tears streaming down her cheeks. The woman whispered, "Oh, you're my sweet grandson. Oh, you're my pretty little one. What chubby cheeks." Grandma's joy. Kevin and Carl entered the nursery. They said hello. The woman asked, "Nice to meet you. Is this your husband, Alice? And this is his daddy?" The girl shook her head negatively. "No, Mom. This is my paternal sibling, Kevin, and this is my paternal grandfather." The woman turned pale and started gulping for air. Alice brought her some water and a sedative. She began to tell her how she lived with them, how much they had helped her, and about her failed affair. Vanessa only shook her head and kept squinting at the elderly businessman. Then she asked quietly, "You must hate me, don't you? I'm the one who's separated, and you're right. You are. In my defense, I can only say one thing. I loved Walter so deeply and truly that I would have done anything to stay with him. And he worshipped Alice. He couldn't let her out of his arms. We were happier than anyone in the world, and we didn't need big money or fancy cars. We had our own world, just the two of us. And when Walter died, my life stopped, ended in an instant. All these years I haven't lived, I've existed. I brought Ashley to the house more out of desperation than anything else. I was afraid to be alone. I didn't think I could handle Alice on my own, and then I just accepted it. My daughter asked me many times to leave her stepfather, but I couldn't hear her. It was like I was deaf. I regret it now. Alice and I became estranged over this. It's as if a wall of offense and misunderstanding has grown between us. I'd really like to change that." Carl sighed. "It's hard. What's the point of dredging up the past? You can't undo it anyway. You can't get Walter and Megan back. I'm glad I found my granddaughter. Now I'm happy to take care of my great-grandchildren. You're her mom, so you're part of our family. So let's learn to live in a new way of love and trust. Welcome to our home." They talked for a long time over dinner and reminisced, then took turns entertaining Brian. And for the first time in many years after the death of her beloved husband, Vanessa felt so good and light at heart, even seemed to breathe easier. She didn't blame her daughter for her failed romance. The girl made a mistake, who knows who, but she saw how happy Alice was with her son, her grandfather and brother. Her eyes were shining. Carl helped Alice to enter the university by correspondence and began to gradually dedicate her to his transport business. It was now their joint family business. Brian was growing up, much to the delight of the family. Alice over the years became a company director on a par with Kevin. They were comfortable working together. Kevin had long ago met a good simple girl, Catherine, married and raised a daughter. But Alice, after 2 betrayals, could not get close to anyone else. She did not trust men. She was afraid that again she would be offended and betrayed. But her grandfather helped her here too. He had long ago noticed how one of his companions, Thomas, looked at her. He could see from the outside that he liked Alice very much, but go to get close to her, he did not dare. After all, the company all knew that Alice suppresses all attempts of courtship. She for eyes even nicknamed the Snow Queen. So Carl decided to bring the couple together. He had long known Thomas as a decent and honest man. He was not a womanizer, a widower, also raising his daughter alone. At first he'd asked Alice to look after little Annie a couple of times, sort of casually. And when he saw that the children got along and so did Alice and the girl, he skillfully introduced Thomas and Alice. They became friends at first. They had a lot of common themes. The children were the same age, and then feelings arose between them. It was not passion, not a passionate, hot romance, but a deep sense of respect, loyalty, and true love. Grandpa was rubbing his hands together, seeing that his grandson and granddaughter were now happy, had their own families, and were doing well. Vanessa had long since separated from Ashley's flatmate and now often came to visit her daughter and grandson. She realized that this was her real family. She started taking Brian to her house for the summer. It became her outlet to spend time with her grandson. It was like she was getting younger herself. One day, Alice and her husband Thomas went to pick up their son from his grandmother from the village. From afar, they saw their son. He was playing fun with the boys in chase. Seeing his parents, Brian rushed to them with all his legs, hugging and caressing them. He missed them so much. Not far away at a courtyard table, some local regulars were drinking. On the table, the usual picture: tinned food, simple snacks, and glasses with murky liquid. Suddenly, one of them got distracted from the process and looked at the newcomers in an expensive car. The woman with the child seemed so familiar to him, and when Vanessa approached them, the man suddenly got up from the table and, staggering, went to the carriageway, came close to Alice and said, "Alice, are you? Wow, I hardly recognized you. What a beauty. Is this your son and husband?" The astonished Alice muttered, "Alex Stewart. Is that you? I certainly never would have known. Why are you drinking in broad daylight? Doesn't your wife scold you?" The man only waved his hand. "I don't have a wife and family anymore. I was a fool to leave you then. I still regret it to this day. Linda never loved me. They sucked all the money out of me and screwed my family. My father went to jail, they sold the house, and my mother died of grief. Her heart couldn't take it. And that bitch went abroad a long time ago and lives happily on my money. So now I'm a pauper. So I drink with grief. What else is left? And you're good. You've made it to the top. You haven't broken down." Alice grinned bitterly. "Yes, I didn't break down. My teachers were good. They taught me how to survive. I'm sorry I have to go. My family is waiting." Thomas hugged Alice, took his son's hand, and they walked to Vanessa's yard. The woman whispered to Alice, "Oh, I didn't tell you that Linda's got everyone in the world. Alex is a drunk. He often knocks on my door, crying. What a fool he was. He kept asking about you. He said he couldn't forget. I didn't tell him anything about you." Alice smiled, and it was right not to tell him. "I've been happy with Thomas and our son for a long time, and I don't need anyone else. And I have forgiven the traitors long ago. Fate punishes them. It's over." Alex returned to his company, had half a glass without a snack, and then grabbed his head and just howled from longing and hopelessness. How he regretted that he had lost his first love. He'd traded her for money. He should have listened to his parents. No one else had ever loved him like Alice. He bit his elbows, pounded his fist on the table, but he realized that nothing could be undone. Alice and her husband sat at her mother's house, drinking tea with fragrant jam. The washed son was dozing on her shoulder, and on the other side her husband tenderly embraced her, and she felt herself the happiest mom, wife, sister, and daughter on earth. A mother of many children takes a job with a fading millionaire widower, and barely had she sat down at the piano, Marian looked at the note for what must have been the 10th time, rereading it. No, the handwriting was legible, but the content. "Marian, I'm sorry, but I can't go on like this. I've fallen in love with another woman, and today she and I are leaving for another city. Don't look for us. Tell the children I love them. Matthew." She slowly sat back in her chair and waved the note away, as if that little scrap of paper could provide some kind of coolness. "It just can't be." Marian muttered quietly. No, she'd noticed something strange going on with Matthew lately. She had noticed it, but she didn't want to believe it. It was true what they said about a husband cheating the wife would be the last to know. He told her he was working hard, that he was tired, that he was working late, that he was going out in the evenings and weekends. Even the kids seemed to have begun to suspect something. At least the eldest, Stephen, he's 14 now. Marian, at his age, would probably realize by now that her mom and dad don't like each other and are only together because they have nowhere to live separately. Of course, in front of the children, Marian pretended that everything was fine. "Daddy just works hard," she answered all their questions and smiled, trying to make it look believable. "He does it for us." She saw Stephen frown incredulously. He hadn't asked his mother anything, perhaps because he didn't want to bother his younger brother and sister. Or maybe he thought the adults would figure it out for themselves. Suspicions had plagued Marian for a long time. She tried to ignore them as best she could. Her blonde, long hair stuck to the front passenger seat of her husband's car. Though Marian's was dark walnut-colored and long past her shoulders, she wouldn't let it go. Long hair isn't practical when you have 3 kids. Just giving a lift to one of his colleagues, she thought. Was Marian thinking about hair or acquaintances? The smell of someone else's sweet feminine perfume from his clothes. The sound of a text message arriving on his phone at 2 a.m. Matthew, who'd been going to the bathroom for an hour at a time just to go have a beer with his friends. And his friends who hid their eyes if they happened to run into Marion. All of this she found an explanation for. Why, she thought, clutching the note in her hands. Why did I make excuses for him when it was so obvious? Just because I was used to trusting him? Or because I've never cheated anyone myself? In 15 years of marriage, Marion had never once lied to Matthew, even about the smallest things. Or maybe she was just afraid of ruining their stable, steady world she'd grown so accustomed to over the years. "Don't wake trouble while it's quiet," Marion's grandmother was fond of saying. Marion didn't wake her up, just pretended everything was the same as before, until he decided to make the first move. "Mum, are we having dinner tonight?" Stephen came into the kitchen. He had always picked up her moods like radar, and now he knew at once that something was wrong with his mother. Marion twitched, tried to hide the note, but the son jumped to her in 2 steps, practically pulled the paper from his mother's hands, read it in a couple of seconds, sighed in a mature way, without surprise, as if he had long been prepared that such a thing could happen. "I see. Have you called him yet?" "Why?" "What do you mean, why?" The eldest son sat down next to me. Of all the children, he was the most like Marion, the same dark hazel hair, expressive green eyes and straight, neat nose. But unlike the soft Marion, Stephen was serious and sensible from childhood, as if he was preparing for the fact that he would have to become the head of the family. "We'll have to discuss divorce, alimony. Who will pay for the flat? We have a mortgage for another 5 years. You're probably right. We should just talk to him about it. I just don't believe it's real yet." His son sighed and put his hand over hers. "I know it's very difficult for you right now, Mum, but you and I both knew this was going to happen at some point. How long has he been cheating on you? 3 years? 5 years?" Marion flinched as if struck by a blow. "I don't know. Let's not talk about it. You'd better call the younger ones. We must have supper." Stephen got up. "I'll get them." "You're not going to tell them yet?" "No. I'll contact your father first." Marion threw the note into the rubbish bin. Matthew didn't answer his phone or text messages. Marion even called him at work. They said Matthew had tendered his resignation a few days earlier, and they never saw him again. Marion also called some of his friends. They replied that they didn't know anything either. Only one of the mates, Alex, said that Matthew had told him about his plans to leave his wife and kids and run off with his mistress. "I thought he was joking," Alex sighed. "It turned out to be a joke." "You knew Matthew was cheating on me, didn't you?" Marion asked. There was silence in the phone for a few seconds. But then Alex answered. "Yes." "Okay," said Marion. "I understand. Thanks for telling me everything." She finished the calls, looked thoughtfully out the window. The children were already asleep, and now she had time to think and decide what to do next. After Molly, their youngest daughter, had been born 7 years ago, it was clear that Marion wouldn't be working for a long time. "And what are you going to do there?" her husband said then. "Even if you worked double shifts at your hospital, your salary wouldn't even be enough for 1 child, let alone 3. Marion sighed. She realized that nurses weren't paid that much. Matthew continued. "Take care of the house and the children, and we'll have enough money." So she listened to her husband and resigned from the hospital where she had worked for many years. Of course, they were very upset. There was already a shortage of nurses, and there were very few responsible and careful professionals like Marion. She didn't really want to quit. She enjoyed her work, but it was difficult to combine it with caring for her husband and children. After she was fired, Marian didn't know where to put herself for the first time. She was used to being torn between her shifts, her husband, her children, and household chores. Only maternity leave was a rest for her, but only from work, because the rest of her duties were not canceled. Now she could take Molly and Alex to nursery in the morning and Stephen to school. On the way back, she had to go grocery shopping, then do the dishes, put the toys away, throw things in the wash, sweep and mop the floors. And then it was time to make lunch so that by the time it was ready, she could run to pick up the younger ones from kindergarten. Marian used to run to the school to pick up Stephen, but after the little sister started kindergarten, the eldest of the family protested. "I'm a big boy," he told his mother. "I can walk to school on my own." "You're only 9?" Marian objected. Stephen only furrowed his eyebrows stubbornly. "The school's near the house. You've got 2 kids to drag from kindergarten, and then you have to follow me. And I'm ashamed to walk with my mom, like a little kid, honestly." His mom sighed and agreed. Once Stephen had made up his mind about something, there was no changing his mind. In time, Marian fell into this cycle of home life and didn't even realize she'd ever worked. Matthew's money was enough for them, and her husband was satisfied with the fact that after work he had a clean house, a hot dinner, fed and washed children, and a wife who did not smell of chlorine and iodine. Only now Marian did not understand what she should do in this situation. She hasn't worked in 7 years. They live in a flat that still has a mortgage to pay for a few more years. The money they have now is only enough for a month at the most. If they cut back on all their expenses, 2 months. Of course, there was hope that Matthew would come to his senses and call. But her gut feeling told her that wasn't going to happen. And then what to do? Where do I get the money? Marian had no one to help her. She didn't know her father. Her mother never told her much about him. And her mom had died 5 years ago. "We've got to get a job," thought Marian. "Otherwise, we'll soon be on the street." The woman who sat across from her took another look at her CV and sighed heavily. She lowered her heavy metal-rimmed glasses closer to the tip of her nose. It was getting towards evening, and the employment officer wanted to finish the day and go home as soon as possible. And here was this misunderstanding, a 35-year-old mother of 3 minor children who had last worked 7 years ago as a nurse in a regular hospital. "I don't know what to offer you," she said. "I don't suppose you'd consider per diem or full-time work at all?" Marian sighed and waved her hands. The woman snorted unhappily. "Then I have nothing to offer you." "Nothing at all?" Marian clarified. "No." Noticing the disappointed look on Marian's face, the woman said, "I still have your phone number, and if anything comes up, I'll call you." "Thank you," Marian replied, smiled, and walked out, carefully closing the door behind her. Already outside, when she got into her old black Toyota, which she had bought before her marriage, Marian exhaled slowly and leaned back in the driver's seat. "It's okay," she said to herself. "We'll make it." She mentally counted the money she had left there should be enough for another month. She had already cut back on her own expenses, but she didn't want to save money on the children. Though if she couldn't find a job, she'd have to cut back on their clubs and activities. She could also sell some of her things, especially expensive clothes or shoes. Marian didn't have any, but it would be possible to take the jewelry, laptop, and maybe the TV from the bedroom to a pawn shop for appraisal. All the jewelry, TVs, laptop, and even Marian's new winter boots that Matthew had given her last New Year's Eve had already been sold. They were very nice, but uncomfortable, and she'd hardly ever worn them. Then she remembered and decided to check how much they were worth. Turned out to be a fortune. Marian dropped the price by a quarter, and within a couple of hours some happy woman took them. "I spent 6 months looking for them in all the shops," she told Marian. "Now all my girlfriends will be jealous of me." When she had gone, Marian breathed a sigh of relief. They could last another fortnight. What then? She had already cut every expense she could. There was nothing left to sell. Would she really have to settle for full-time work? What about the kids? Leave them alone from morning till night. Of course, Stephen's 14, Alex is 10, and Molly's 7. They're not toddlers. And the eldest has been telling his mother for a long time that he can handle the younger ones if she has to feed them, pick them up from school, make them do their homework. But does she have the right to put the responsibilities of adulthood on her boy's shoulders so early? The sound of the phone suddenly ringing almost made Marian jump. She wasn't expecting a call, and the number was unfamiliar. Normally she tried not to take such calls, but suddenly she thought that she was about to be told something good because she was tired of bad news. "I'm listening," she said cautiously into the receiver, dreading the thought that she was about to be offered some kind of credit or told a story about a suspicious transaction on her card. But the pleasant female voice on the other end said something else. "Marian? My name is Amanda. I got your number from the unemployment office. Are you still considering a job offer?" "Yes," Marian shouted hastily and then, ashamed of her impulsiveness, added more calmly, "I'm still considering it." "Good." Amanda seemed genuinely pleased. "It says here that you've been a nurse for many years. You also have experience with critically ill patients." "That's right," Marian replied. "I would like to ask you if you would consider a job as a carer." Marian thought for a moment. She had never worked as a carer, but it was hardly more difficult than a nurse's job. If she'd ever handled an entire ward, she could certainly handle one seriously ill person. "I can think about your offer," she said cautiously, "but I'd have to know all the conditions." "I'll be sure to tell you everything," Amanda promised. "Would it be convenient for you to come to my office at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning?" "Yes, of course." "Great. Then I'll text you the address. I'll see you tomorrow." "Goodbye," Marian replied and pressed the end button. Her heart was pounding frantically for some reason. No, of course it was too early to rejoice, but at least one sentence had come to life again, and hope had been rekindled in her. After taking the children to school, Marian drove to her appointment. On the way, she once again ran through her mind the answers to all the questions she thought she might be asked. She also wrote out in notes on her phone what she wanted to find out for herself. Amanda's office was located right in the center of the city, a huge, modern business center. When Marian stepped into the new, shiny, almost silent lift, she thought that Amanda must be working for some very wealthy people. "Good afternoon," she was greeted in the reception area by a pretty young girl. "Amanda's secretary, I think. My name is Vivienne." "I have an interview here at 10 o'clock, Marian informed her. "For the position of a carer," she said sympathetically or surprisingly, but she pulled herself together and smiled politely. "Please have a seat. I will clarify everything now." Marian sat down, and the secretary rang the telephone and asked something quietly and quickly into the receiver. The answer was apparently in the affirmative. Then Vivian stood up, smiled once more at Marian and said, "Amanda is expecting you. Come in." Marian was escorted to the door like royalty. For a second she was even frightened. A place like this wouldn't treat a mere nurse like that. Maybe she was confused. "Hello," Marian said timidly as she entered the office. Amanda appeared to be a pretty woman about her age. Black hair, gathered in a neat low ponytail, business suit, expensive glasses. "Good afternoon, Marian," she said. "Please have a seat." She pointed with her hand to a cushioned armchair directly across from her. Marian sat down. Amanda smiled and clicked on the clipboard lying on the desk in front of her. "According to our information, you have extensive experience as a nurse, including you indicated that you've cared for critically ill patients?" Marian nodded. "And you are also considering a position as a carer. Is that correct?" That's correct, Marion confirmed. Good. I'm representing a client who needs a carer. Mr. Jacob has been paralyzed from the waist down for a number of years, and he has several other cardiovascular, respiratory, and digestive problems. Marion nodded again, showing she was listening intently. From a physical point of view, your job would not be considered hard, Amanda continued. The whole house is equipped for Mr. Jacob's needs. Motorized wheelchairs, lifts, handrails, and so on. There'll be no complicated medical procedures, either shots, pills, IVs, etc. Nothing a nurse couldn't master, I realized. Right, Marion said. Amanda paused, as if considering how best to present the next piece of information. Then she pressed her lip, as if she'd changed her mind about what she was going to say, and asked, I believe you have children? Yes, Marion nodded. 3. Amanda nodded thoughtfully. They're all in school, aren't they? Yes. So they'll be on holiday soon? Yes, in a couple of weeks. Are you considering accommodation? Amanda asked. Our client's house is out of town, and it would be inconvenient for you to go there every day. Marion shook her head. I don't have anyone to leave my children with, she said, frustrated and thinking she was going to be told goodbye. But suddenly Amanda spoke up. You don't have to leave them. You will live with them together in the grounds of the manor in the annex. To be exact, it's a detached building, very spacious, very cozy. I assure you, you'll like it. Marion looked at her incredulously. Are you saying that the 4 of us will just be allowed to live in a tenant's house? Amanda nodded and smiled happily. What's more, you won't even have to cook. The meals are free, as is the accommodation. You will be fed with the rest of the staff of the manor. Sounds tempting, Marion said cautiously. I'm beginning to suspect there's a catch. Exactly, Amanda confirmed cheerfully. I suppose you'd like to know the hours and wages? I would, said Marion cautiously. Amanda nodded. Her neatly manicured fingers ran across the screen of the tablet. She turned it toward Marion. Marion's eyes widened. This is for the week, Amanda explained. A week? Marion was even more surprised. That much money? Amanda sighed a little too humanly, which was very unlike her image of an impeccable business assistant. I realize you're expecting a catch. And there is, she said. Marion pressed her lips together, nodded slowly, and looked questioningly at Amanda. She rubbed the bridge of her nose tiredly. The thing is, Mr. Jacob is a very particular man, and he has a difficult temper. Not everyone can get along with him. Marion breathed out a sigh of relief. That's it? I've seen all sorts of people in my years at the hospital, and we've never been paid so much for being unhealthy. That's not quite all, Amanda shook her head. I can't promise you'll have a steady schedule. Roughly speaking, if Mr. Jacob thought of calling you in at 2 a.m., that would mean you'd have to get up and show up. But everything you've said so far is true, isn't it? Marion asked. Yes, the salary that I wrote you is paid once a week, because the staff doesn't usually stay there for a long time, Amanda answered. You and the children will live in a separate building and eat at the employer's expense. If you or the children need to go into town, we will provide you with a car and driver. And in return, I have to look after an elderly, capricious millionaire, and be ready to appear at his beck and call at any moment. You could say that Amanda nodded. I am ready, said Marion. When can we start? It took them a while to complete the paperwork. Then Marion waited until the children were on holiday. Finally, they packed all the necessary things and drove to the manor to the mysterious Jacob. Are you sure he's not some kind of freak? Alex asked her. We're all going to his place. We don't know where to go. Marion blushed. They were traveling in a car with a driver sent directly by her employer. She looked in the mirror and saw that the driver, who introduced himself as Marcus, was smiling. Alex, we're not going somewhere. We're going to an upmarket village, Marion said indignantly. Jacob is normal, please, nothing extra. If you have to meet Jacob, you realize how important this job is to me. Jacob will probably only get to know you, Marcus said. He doesn't like new people very much, and he wanted me to bring you straight to the outhouse. I see, replied Marion. A short time later, they entered the village. Wow, Alex commented. If there are crazy people living here, they are very rich. Stephen laughed, and Molly nearly broke the glass she had pressed her forehead against to get a good look. Yes, thought Marion, there are some very rich people living here. They drove past huge mansions surrounded by large fences. That's nothing, Marcus said cheerfully. You haven't seen Jacob's main house yet. The next one will be more interesting, Marcus said. After they had driven through the village, there was a large area surrounded by a beautiful, elegant, but very high fence. The driver pressed some button on a small black remote control that appeared in his hand, and the gate opened. We are now entering the grounds of the manor, Marcus commented. They drove for a long time along the road, which was surrounded on both sides by rows of neatly trimmed trees. Then a huge modern house, made of glass and metal, appeared in front of them. But the car did not go towards the mansion, but turned left. A few minutes later, they stopped in front of a small, neat wooden house. Marion and the children got out of the car. It's beautiful, said Marion. This outhouse must be very old. Marcus, who had also got out of the car and was already taking their suitcases out of the boot, replied. Yes, it was built more than half a century ago. But don't worry. The outbuilding was restored only recently, about 2 years ago. There's water, electricity, everything. It looks like something out of a 19th century novel, said Stephen. That's right, the driver replied, coming up to the porch with his suitcases in his hands. I don't know exactly, but I think that was the idea. When they went inside, Marion noticed that, despite the seeming compactness of the outbuilding, it was very spacious inside. There was a small entrance hall, which almost immediately led into a living room, apparently connected to the kitchen dining room. A spacious in-suite bathroom, and, most importantly, 4 bedrooms. Wow, Alex shrieked. Am I going to have a separate bedroom? Marion smiled. Apparently, yes. In the old flat, the brothers had shared a room, and only Molly had her own bedroom. Stephen looked at his mother and smiled. He's all grown up now, isn't he? Suddenly, Marion thought that he needed his own room for a long time. Meanwhile, Marcus had already brought in all their things and said, Make yourselves comfortable, have a rest. I think in about an hour they'll be here to take you to lunch. You'll get to know everyone there. Thank you, Marcus, Marion said sincerely. He smiled. It was nice to meet you all. I hope you enjoy your time here and stick around. In the hour they had, everyone had time to put their things away and settle into their new place of residence a little. Alex and Molly even ran around the outhouse. There they found a gazebo, a swing, and some well-tended flower beds. Mummy, I love it here, Molly exclaimed, running up to Marion and hugging her legs. Marion smiled and stroked her daughter's hair. I'm very glad, she said. I hope you won't be bored here. Not while you're working, the younger one said confidently. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. Yes, come in, Marion answered. A tall, blonde-haired man with brown eyes walked into the cabin. He was dressed simply in a white t-shirt and black jeans, but he held himself so freely and confidently that Marian immediately realized that this man plays not the least role here. "Good afternoon, everyone." The first thing the stranger said was hello. "My name is Robert. I'm Jacob's assistant and the manager of this house." "Nice to meet you," she said. "My name is Marian, and these are my children, Steve and Alex and Molly." "Hello," they said in unison. Robert smiled. "It's a pleasure. I'm sure you will revitalize our sleepy kingdom. Now I invite you all to lunch." He led them down an inconspicuous path that led to the side entrance of the mansion. Through this door, they passed into a large and cozy kitchen. "Here are our newcomers." A woman's voice greeted them cheerfully. Marian saw a short, slightly overweight woman in her 50s. "I'm Camila," she said. "I am in charge of the food in this house. Come to the table." Marian introduced herself and the children, and they were seated at the table. There were about 10 other people besides them. They were all employees of the manor. They introduced themselves to Marian, but she was so nervous that she couldn't really remember anyone, just smiled and nodded. At Marian's right hand sat Robert. "Don't worry," he whispered in her ear. "You'll remember everyone in a couple of days." "How do you know what I was thinking?" Marian asked. "It's not difficult," replied Robert. "When I came to work here and everyone was introduced to me, I thought the same thing." Marian grinned. Her first fear had receded. Everyone seemed to be very nice and friendly here. Also, the kids were very well behaved after they ate lunch. Robert took Marian to meet the supervisor, and Marcus volunteered to give the children a tour of the estate. When Robert and Marian stopped in front of the office door, her employer's assistant began to speak softly, looked her in the eye, and said, "Marian, remember the most important thing: any comments Jacob will let slip about you have nothing to do with you personally. He is just an old, sick man with a hard fate and a very bad temper. In fact, that's why we're willing to give you such a great salary and facilities." "Thank you for telling me, Robert. But don't worry, I'm tougher than I look." "I'm sure you are." Then he knocked and opened the door. At last came a creaky, aged voice. "I thought I was going to die in here before any of you bothered to come in. I wonder why I pay you, all you bums, so much money." In a chair by the window sat an old, hunched old man. Marian thought that this was the kind of man they drew in books when they described an orphan protagonist who lived with an evil old relative. It was obvious that Jacob used to be a tall, sturdy man. Though the years had dried him up and pulled his head to the ground, his shoulders were still broad and even a little proud. Short gray hair, wrinkled neck, stubble, long straight nose, tightly closed lips, and angry, prickly eyes. They must once have been blue or green, but now they had faded so much that it was impossible to tell, and with those eyes he studied Marian coldly. It was as if Marian was being scanned, checking what was inside her. "Is it this one?" Jacob asked Robert, ignoring her completely, as if Marian herself were incapable of answering him. "That's Marian," the assistant answered. "She will be your new nurse." "Hello," said Marian, deciding that she would not stand here waiting to be addressed. Jacob frowned as if he'd eaten something sour. "Yes," he said, "it gets worse every time. Come on, Robert, let's go see what we can do with her." The assistant smiled encouragingly at Marian and went out. Without Robert, Marian immediately felt somehow defenseless, but she was determined that she would not let her charge spoil her mood. She needed this job. She liked the bright, spacious outhouse they were put in. She liked being able to spend quality time with the children. She liked the fact that she didn't have to go anywhere, and she certainly wasn't going to be leaving here in a week. So Marian pulled herself together, smiled, and said, "Well, where do we start? How about a shave for starters? Otherwise you look very overgrown. Not like a millionaire, but like a homeless man. Oh, why did I say that? She immediately thought in horror. I wanted to say something else about my skills, about what a highly skilled nurse I am. Now he's going to fire me for sure. Jacob raised his bushy gray eyebrows in surprise and suddenly laughed like a madman. Like a homeless man, you say? He said, when he could laugh. Well, take me to the bathroom, if that's the case. Where's your bathroom? She asked. The old man rolled his eyes. Yeah, that's professionalism in all its glory, he grumbled. Then he pressed a button on the arm of the chair, and it went somewhere along the line. All she had to do was follow him. Jacob led her into a large, airy room. It took Marian a few seconds to explore the place and marveled at how conveniently everything was arranged. She found a cape, shaving foam, and a clipper. Do you even know how to do that? Jacob asked her doubtfully. I do, Marian said calmly. The last time she had used a clipper had been a long time ago, when she was still working at the hospital. One of her patients had asked her to shave his neck before an operation. He couldn't do it himself, his hands were too shaky. That's all right, thought Marian, I can do it now. When she had finished, she looked with satisfaction at the result of her work. There, she said, turning her ward to the mirror. A different look. Jacob saw himself and gasped. What have you done, you fool? He shouted. Couldn't you at least leave a few millimeters? Why cut everything to 0? You can see all my wrinkles and folds. I look like I'm about to die. Marian looked in the mirror, but decided not to show fear. It's hygienic, she said sternly. And it suits you better, believe me, as a woman. The old man chuckled. Any man has ever been a woman. Marian's face seemed to flush. Yes, she had come here in a simple dress, with her hair unsightly in a ponytail, but to take her for an old maid was too much. Don't worry, she said dryly. I have 3 children. Jacob whistled. And from different men, too. One, Marian said wryly. But he's an interesting guy, having 3 kids and a woman to work with. Marian pressed her lips together. We broke up. Why are you panting like that? Did you run away? That's none of your business, she said more sharply than she intended. What's next on the plan? Snake, get the clipboard from the table, the old man grumbled. Marian should have left a detailed schedule there. The tablet was found in the indicated place. Marian ran her eyes over it. Yes, there's a lot to do. It seems that Jacob is indeed seriously ill. At least judging by the number of pills and shots he gets every day. Have you had lunch yet? She clarified. No, I was waiting for you. Of course I've had lunch, I see. Marian decided not to react to the abruptness. Then you have rest and IVs now, she said. You're a genius. Jacob pulled the tablet down so his fingers shared the screen but said nothing. Are we going to drip lying down or standing up? How many more stupid questions are there going to be today, Marian thought. Marian, hardly gritting her teeth, answered. There will be questions until I fully understand your regimen and appointments. For your information, some patients prefer to sit during the procedure. I'm thrilled for them. We're laying on you, she continued, ignoring the sarcastic tone, which means there should be a couch. Marian began to look round. The old man sighed and nodded his head. There's a door over there that leads to the treatment room. The IV went relatively quietly, too. Marian was afraid she wouldn't get into a vein the first time. After all, it had been years since she'd injected. But today she was lucky. Jacob even closed his eyes and dozed off. He woke up when she was pulling the needle out of his vein. "We're going for a walk now," Marian said. "Really?" said the old man. "I thought it was a tambourine dance." Marian wondered how she had so much patience. She was used to strangers being so rude and disrespectful to her for just doing her job. Jacob hired her for this job, if you think about it. It's understandable that she wouldn't know anything on the first day. Can't she have a little self-restraint? Marian thought as she walked through the garden beside his chair. Why should he? He's a millionaire. He's not used to restraining himself. He must have had more than one carer before her. And if she fails or decides to leave, his team will find another one the same day. In the meantime, he can just take his anger out on people like they're his punching bags. During the walk, however, Jacob was a little quieter. It was as if he was immersed in his own memories, not paying attention to Marian, who was walking beside him. He just rolled along the paths, automatically switching buttons to turn in the right direction. He doesn't really need me right now, Marian thought. He can ride on his own. The paths are perfect everywhere. But according to the terms of the contract, I must accompany him at all times and never leave him alone. I wonder if you like that kind of work, Merlin? Jacob asked suddenly. I'm Marian, she corrected. I don't care. It's just a job, a normal job. He chuckled. You don't say. I have a lot of my own companies, employing thousands of people. If I wanted to, I could buy up all the houses in this village. That's a proper job. You can leave me at the bar, the old man continued through gritted teeth. If you stay, you'll do a lot of other, less pleasant things. Isn't that what you dreamed of at school? Marian felt herself getting really angry. I don't know why you started this conversation, she said honestly. Jacob grinned. Aren't you ashamed of yourself in front of the kids? You're a grown woman working as a nurse. You don't even have to be smart about it. Just do as you're told. A monkey could do it. Or is that all you're not clever enough to do? If the monkey could do it, why do you change carers so often? Marian asked. Maybe it's because you don't treat them like people, but like animals. I think I'd agree that chimpanzees or gorillas would be a better fit. At least they wouldn't understand how you treat them. The old man laughed. I'm a millionaire. Manners don't suit you, princess. You can leave even today. I'll even ask Robert to pay you a week's salary in advance. For a second, Marian wanted to take the money, grab the children, leave and never see this arrogant, nasty old man who treats her like some baron with servants. No, she said to herself, that's what he wants, and I'll never get another job like that. Marian remembered how many CVS she'd sent, how many times she'd been rejected, how many evenings she'd sat thinking about what else she could sell to pay the mortgage and food. I'm fine with it, she said cheerfully to Jacob, and even found the strength to smile. We've got dinner and evening treatments coming up, so I think you should turn your vehicle in the opposite direction. Marian had been working for Jacob for a fortnight now, and every day she felt like she couldn't hate the man more. And every new day he proved her otherwise. The old man always found something to pick on about Marian: her appearance, her voice, her gait, words spoken with the wrong accent. Once she got overexcited and didn't get into his vein the first time. He remembered it for 3 days. Marian was shaking with unfair resentment, anger, and most of all, powerlessness. She realized that Jacob was aware of her predicament and was taking advantage of it. He was used to power, used to being first in everything, to being obeyed, to being feared. And now he is just a pathetic, sick grandfather who is left all alone. Having plucked up courage, Marian once asked Robert if their boss had a wife and children. As far as I know, he replied, no children, but he had 4 wives. 4? Marian gasped. Yep, the first one he married when he was very young. I think she was from a rich family. Did he work for her father then, or did they have a business together? I don't know exactly. It was kind of a marriage of convenience. Jacob worked hard. His father-in-law noticed him and helped him start his own business. When the boss got big enough, he didn't need his wife, so he filed for divorce. Then there was some model about 10 or 15 years younger than him, Robert continued. They lived with her for a while, 3 or 4 years. Then he caught her cheating on him and divorced her too. And the third, as far as I know, left him. She was also some young and beautiful girl who got bored with him. Gee, sighed Marion. And the fourth was already some old friend of his. They were the same age and had been friends for a long time. They'd married when they were both in their 50s. Both he and she had a few divorces under their belts. She was the one they seemed to have a good life with. But she died about 5 years ago of cancer. Oh, that sounds sad, said Marion. People who've been here longer than me say that's when he got the way he is now. He was supposedly quite tolerable before. No angel, of course, but he could live. Now he's getting worse every day. Marion sighed. That's a very sad way of putting it. Doesn't he have any relatives? Robert shrugged. There seems to be a sister who has children and grandchildren of her own, but they live abroad and rarely come here. He's a very lonely man, said Marion. It's sad to be so ill, living alone in a huge house. Aha, replied the steward. So he takes out his poison on those around him. Every evening Marion looked forward to the end of the working day. Then she could finally live for herself, spend time with her children. They had settled in quite well, by the way. All the staff were very friendly to Stephen, Alex, and especially little Molly. Camila took care of them, feeding them goodies. Marcus, with Marion's permission, took the children for rides with him if he went somewhere not far away on the chief's errands. The boys had mastered the grounds of the manor with its huge garden and many beautiful quiet corners. The only thing they tried to do was to keep out of sight of the master of the house. It wasn't that hard, though. Jacob only went for walks when Marion was with him. It was usually in the morning, and only sometimes in the afternoon or late afternoon. A fortnight later, Marion was reminded for the first time that she had an irregular working day. She and the children had long since gone to bed when Marion's phone suddenly rang. Robert's number came up. Yes, I'm listening, Marion mumbled sleepily. Marion, get in the house right away. Jacob's having a seizure. Marion jumped up on the bed. She was wide awake. She had been warned that the ward could have such attacks. In such a case, Marion should immediately run into the house and administer first aid. She didn't even bother to get dressed, just threw on a dressing gown over her nightgown and rushed into the house. The lights were already on everywhere, and frightened night maids and guards were running around. Marion made her way to the bedroom without wasting time. Jacob was half lying on the bed, breathing so heavily that she could hear him whistling and wheezing from a distance. Beside him stood Robert, who had put the supervisor in, opened the windows, now pulling out anything Marion might need. She nodded gratefully to the manager and set to work. She put the oxygen mask on Jacob's blue face and started the oxygen supply. Then she quickly found the vials in the medicine cabinet, filled the syringes, and administered the injections. Fortunately, the attack was not severe, and the medicine began to take effect quickly. Marion watched carefully as the old man's pulse evened out, his breathing recovered, and his complexion returned to normal. There, she said, "It's all right, Jacob." The old man nodded and gave a hoarse squeeze. "For someone who's just been hoofing it, that'll do. You should have some hot tea with mint or linden now," Marion said. "I'll have them make it for you." "Yeah," said the chief. "And I have one more favor to ask of you. Will you do it?" Marion nodded. "Yes, of course. What is it?" "Next time move faster, or you'll be dead before you get there." Marion felt all her pity, which she had just felt, watching the old man suffering a seizure, as if blown away by the wind. "I'll do my best," she replied discreetly. "I'll go and tell him about the tea." A minute after Marian had asked for tea to be made, Robert came into the kitchen. "How are you?" he asked. "All right." "That's just the way he is. He'll play the villain to the last, even when he's dying." Marian asked. "I think that's what he is." The steward sighed and ran his hand through his hair. "You know," he said in a confidential tone, "I sometimes think that the chief isn't really like that. It's just that at some point he's decided that this is the only way to communicate with the world, and he's afraid to act human." Marian shrugged her shoulders. "A noble theory, Robert. But I'm sorry, I'm sure he's being sincere." Robert smiled. "How about some coffee?" he suggested. "No, I'd rather go to bed." "Good night." "Good night, Marian." The next day, when Marian and the children came for breakfast, Robert made an unexpected announcement. "Marian, you have the day off today." "Why is that?" she wondered. The manager shrugged his shoulders. "The chief said so. His sister and her children are visiting him. Apparently they'll look after him." Marian frowned. "And the injections? IVs?" Robert waved his hand. "Don't worry, we call a nurse from the private clinic for such cases." "Why doesn't she come every day? Why should I?" Marian didn't understand. "The boss doesn't like new people." Camila suddenly intervened in their conversation with a smile. "He was just putting the children on the second portion of pancakes, so he demands that there should be one constant. Someone who knows all his habits." "I see," Marian replied. "That's why he drives people crazy and makes them quit," she added mentally. "And it's more pleasant to abuse a permanent slave than nurses from a private clinic who will be different every time." But she didn't want to say it out loud in front of the kids. Let them think she had a good job. "We've almost all got the day off," Marcus added. "If you don't mind, Marian, and you guys too. I can take the kids to the zoo and then we can go out for lunch on the way," Marcus said. "Yes, Uncle Marcus," Molly shouted happily. Of the three, she was most attached to the young, cheerful driver, who always paid attention to the children. "No, my good ones," Robert said firmly. "Marcus has the day off and I can't force you on him." The driver waved his hand. "Don't worry, Robert," he said. "I'm going there with my nephew anyway. He's 10, and I'll take yours with me, too. It won't be a problem." Marian looked at the children doubtfully. "We'll behave," Alex said, looking at his mother pleadingly. The eldest shrugged his shoulders, saying that if necessary he would go. Marian never worried about his behavior. "All right," she sighed. "Then I'll go get the money." "No need," Marcus replied. "The chief always leaves money for such small expenses." The others present nodded. "Don't even worry about it," Camila assured her. After breakfast, Marcus and the children went to the garage to start the car and drive to the zoo. Robert and Marian were the only ones left. "Do you have plans for the day off?" the assistant asked Marian. "I don't know. I should probably go into town, see how the flat is." Robert perked up. "Do you want to go for a ride together? I've got a couple of chief cases to take care of. It won't take long, and then we can see your flat. And we can have lunch on the way back if you don't mind." "Yes, that's all right," said Marian. Robert was easy and comfortable with her. He could keep up a conversation without being intrusive. He talked interestingly about the things he was doing now, but did not spill too much. Marian suddenly realized how little she had ever had such simple human companionship in her life. After she quit her job, all she had left in her life was her husband and children. Sure, there were her friends from college and work, but they had their own lives, husbands, kids, jobs, and they didn't get to see each other very often. And after Matthew left, she'd lost herself. Constant thoughts of how to find a job, how to pay the rent, worrying about how her children would feel about their father leaving. There was no time for herself. "How long have you been working for Jacob?" she asked Robert. He thought for a few seconds. 5 years. That's a long time. "Well, if you don't count me, I'm hardly the newest guy in the house." "Wow, how you're all holding up. Is there a secret, or was the manager not like this before?" The manager laughed. "When I came, he was perhaps a little gentler, but he wasn't particularly kind. I won't hide it. He's not easy for me either." "I can imagine," said Marion, sighing. Robert smiled. "For the first 6 months I wanted to quit, probably 7 times a day, then a little less often. Now I don't think about it at all." "Why not?" Marion frowned. "Salary, of course, it plays its part too. Not the last, but not the first." "What else?" Marion wondered. "Robert is so clever, so confident. He must be a good professional and, unlike her, could find many more excellent jobs." "Experience," Robert said. "I not only run the house, but I help Jacob run his business remotely. Don't look so weak and decrepit. He's got a pretty good head." Marion wasn't sure, but she decided not to argue. "And now I'm unlikely to find another job where I can watch how to manage such a huge amount of money," the assistant continued. "Understand?" "I do," said Marion, "except that your life keeps revolving around Jacob. Don't you feel sorry for yourself? Your wife and children hardly ever see you at home." Robert laughed. "I guess I don't look very young," he replied. "But I'm only 33. Marion was confused. "I don't know what you mean," she admitted. "And you look wonderful." "Thank you." "May. I'm flattered. It's not every day I get compliments from such beautiful young women," Robert said. "I mean, I don't have a wife or children yet." "A fiancé?" Marion asked. "No, no girlfriend." "I see that looks suspicious," laughed Marion. "A little," Robert admitted. "I'm just a workaholic. I want to start a family when I'm sure I can provide for them. By the way, we're here. It'll be 15 minutes in the rain. Then we'll see your flat." "Of course," Marion replied. Robert took some folder with documents and went out. Marion was left alone in the car. She suddenly thought that perhaps, like Robert, she would be tied to this house and the mean old man for years to come. "Okay, it's summer now. What about in the autumn when the kids go to school?" she pondered. Marion suddenly realized that Amanda, who had hired her, hadn't talked to her about the matter, most likely because she hadn't counted on Marion holding out this long. And Marion has, and she's not going to quit. "No, Jacob can't wait," she thought, biting her lip painfully, remembering last night. She'd been truly afraid for him then, and for the first time since then, sorry. As soon as he could breathe, he'd snapped at her. Robert came back and interrupted her sad thoughts. He looked pleased. "What? Let's go to your place?" he asked. "Let's go," Marion replied. Everything was fine in her flat, too. It was as unlikely as anything could happen, but Marion was still more used to being in control. "Lunch now," Robert said cheerfully. "I'll show you a lovely place. But I don't think they cook as well as our Camila does." "Oh yes," sighed Marion. "Nothing can compare to her food. But I'll try to surprise you." Robert took her to a large Georgian restaurant on the top floor of a large shopping center. There was pleasant national music playing. The air conditioners were running at full blast, which was especially nice after a hot summer day. They were escorted to a table with two soft sofas right by the window. From there they had a view of the river and the new high bridge. "Would you mind if I chose for you?" Robert asked. "Go ahead," Marian replied cheerfully. "I don't know anything here anyway." "Fine," Robert replied. When the waiter came, Robert pointed his finger at several items on the menu without showing Marian. So she didn't know what to expect. She was surprised when the first thing she got was a glass of red wine. "It's only lunchtime," she reminded her companion. "So?" Robert asked. Marian sighed because she couldn't find any other arguments. "Aren't you going to have any?" she inquired. "I'm driving. Definitely not," Robert replied. The wine was both moderately sweet and tart. Marian savored the taste and suddenly thought she couldn't remember the last time she had sat like this and spent time quietly with a glass of wine. "Thank you," she said. "This is the most wonderful weekend I've ever had." Robert smiled. "Wait to thank you," he said. "The food hasn't arrived yet." Marian liked the food very much. The soft, hot dough of the khachapuri with the slightly difficult-to-stretch cheese, the salad with crisp mini aubergines and lots of greens, the flavorful meat, and the juicy sauces. "Oh," she said, leaning back on the soft back of the couch. "That was wonderful." "I'm very glad," Robert replied. He was leaning back and apparently unable to move either. "It seems that it will take us some time to recover," Robert remarked. Marian nodded lazily and took a sip of wine. "I fully support it," she said. "In the meantime, we can talk." Robert raised his eyebrows in surprise. "That sounds scary," he said. Marian laughed. "I'm not your wife to make it sound scary." "Not yet. Anyway, I'm listening." Marian laughed. For some reason, she felt very light and good. "Tell me about yourself," she asked, and then confessed, "You're a mystery to me." "That's quite a confession," Robert grinned. "Why is that?" I wondered. "I just don't know anything about you," said Marian. "Neither do you about me," Robert remarked. "Fair enough. But let's start with you," Marian suggested. Robert chuckled. "Well, let's. I'm not from around here," he began. "I was born in a small town far, far away from here. Yes, I went to an ordinary village school. Lived in an ordinary family, but always had great ambition." Marian smiled. "So," Robert continued, "I decided to come here. It wasn't easy, but I managed. The student years were fun. Then I got a job second, third, fourth. Then I got to Jacob. Do you know the rest of it?" "I have a feeling you've left a lot out of your story," Marian said thoughtfully. "Who knows, maybe I'll tell you about it later," Robert said. "Now we need to talk about you." "Good. But I haven't got anything interesting either," admitted Marian. "I'm a local, but only my mom raised me. I never met my father, and my mom never told me much about him. She was a music teacher. So, as you know, we didn't live very well." "Did you go to music school?" Robert asked. Marian sighed. "It was a terrible 7 years of my life," she said. "I can only remember one tune now. Mom made me play it most often. Everything else has faded from my memory. I've played this one so many times that if you woke me up at 2 a.m., I could play it with my eyes closed." "What's the tune?" "Bach, Chopin, Tchaikovsky," Robert asked. "No, it's not classical for sure," replied Marian. "Honestly, I don't even know. Mom never told me who the author was. We certainly didn't study it at school. I have a theory that she composed it herself, but I can't say it's true." "Well, go on," said Robert, and then he interrupted himself. Do any of your children go to music school? No one. Marion cut him off. Robert laughed. Shall I order you some more wine? She shrugged, and Robert asked for another glass. Unlike you, I didn't do very well at school, she continued. The only thing I could count on after high school was college. And for some reason I suddenly decided I wanted to be a nurse. I thought it was a very beautiful, noble, and romantic profession, said Marion. It is, Robert agreed. Not a bit of it. Marion sighed. No, I don't regret it. Studying was interesting, and so was working. It was at work that I met Matthew, my husband. He was a patient of yours. Yeah, I'd just started working. I didn't really know how to do anything on my own. I remember my hands shaking when I was giving injections or dressings. I thought I could see it from a mile away. But Matthew didn't notice. Robert smiled. I'm sure he fell in love with you at first sight. He said he did. Marion nodded. In fact, I liked him too. Soon we started seeing each other, and 6 months later we were married. And then I found out I was pregnant. You've become a very young mum, Robert smiled. Yes, of course it was difficult at first. But then Mum was still alive and she helped me a lot, said Marion and sighed. Then Stephen grew up and went to kindergarten. I went to work, but not for long. When he turned 4, I got pregnant with Alex. And 3 years later, Molly was born. Wow. After Molly was born, we decided I was going to stay at home. That's why I didn't work for 7 years. Wow, Robert said. I must say you're doing a wonderful job, especially after such a break. Marion smiled. Thank you. That's nice to hear. Can I ask you a personal question? Ask away, she nodded to Robert. Marion took another sip of wine. Why did you separate from your husband? Robert asked. Why did I leave my husband? She asked him again. Yes, he left me. Maybe the wine played a part. Maybe it's been a while, but it's the first time I've ever made that confession so easily. He just left a note saying he was in love with another woman, she explained. He didn't even talk to you, Robert wondered. Marion shook her head. What about the children? He didn't even say goodbye to them either? How awful, Robert exclaimed. Marion smiled. I don't know what you mean. What horror. It's all right, she said. I'm fine now. Is that why you're holding on to this job? Robert guessed. Exactly, Marion nodded. They were silent for a few minutes. Each was digesting everything that had been said in the dialogue. Then Marion asked, What about your personal life? You're only 2 years younger than me. I can't believe you haven't had a serious relationship. Robert smiled kind of sadly. I have, and for quite a long time. I started dating an ambitious girl when I was still in college. I had that quality too. Only our goals were different. My ambitions were career-related, and hers were to find a successful man. Aren't you a successful man? Marion asked in surprise. Thank you for saying that. It's hard for me to judge that myself. Then I tell you that you are a successful man, interrupted Marion. Much obliged, Robert replied. Well, anyway, my beloved did not consider me a successful man, and she broke up with me because she said she was worthy of more. A very stupid woman, commented Marion. After that statement, I'm obliged to pour you more wine, Robert said, indicating to the waiter to repeat himself. Oh, sighed Marion, I haven't drunk so much in a long time. So Robert continued. She left me, and I decided that I would become the successful one, and she would come back to me. And how did it go? Marion asked. great. In the process, I realized that I don't want to be with a woman for whom I'm not good enough, for whom I'm important not as a person but as a social status. Marian nodded. And I don't want to be with a man who gave birth to 3 children. And then he left, leaving only a note on the table, she confessed. Robert smiled sadly. I fully support such a wise decision. In the morning, Marian woke up with difficulty. Her head ached and her mouth was dry. The light of the sun shining through the curtains seemed unbearably bright. I overslept, she thought with horror. And I probably didn't even set my alarm clock last night. The clock, however, showed it was still early. Marian showered, brushed her teeth. After making sure the children were still asleep, she slipped quietly out of the outhouse and into the house. Camila was already bustling about in the kitchen. "Oh, Marian." The woman greeted her cheerfully. "Good morning. How are you up early this morning?" "Yes," said Marian hoarsely. "It seems I had a very stormy day off yesterday." Camila smiled understandingly. "Now everything will be. In an hour you will be awake and cheerful, like a 15-year-old schoolgirl." A minute later, she put a huge cup of fragrant tea in front of Marian, smelling of berries and herbs. "The best cure for a hangover," said Camila confidently. "And eat this too." She set down a plate with a large sandwich with meat, lettuce, tomato, and egg. "This is the most delicious thing I've ever eaten in my life," Marian said blissfully as she ate her breakfast. "You're magic." "Thank you," Camila replied, embarrassed. By the beginning of the working day, Marian had recovered enough. Jacob had been unusually friendly today. Perhaps it was the meeting with his relatives, but he hardly commented on Marian's actions and did not make any derogatory comments. "You're remarkably quiet today," said Marian, as they went out for their traditional afternoon walk after lunch. "Don't let it get to you while it's quiet," Jacob said, but not in a mean-spirited way. "All right, I won't," Marian said. "Those are your children, aren't they?" He pointed to Alex and Molly, who were chasing each other around the fountain. Stephen was sitting on a bench, reading a book with one eye and watching the younger ones with the other. "Mine," replied Marian, horrified at the thought that she was about to be reprimanded. But her ward only nodded. "They're good, and they seem to be friendly." "Thank you," Marian replied cautiously. "Are you raising them alone?" Continued to show unexpected interest Chief. "I am now." "That's why you put up with me," Jacob said, realizing it was a statement, not a question. "I wanted to have many children when I was young, too," Jacob said suddenly. "It didn't work out." "You've been married 4 times, haven't you?" Marian asked in surprise, and then a twinge. It was hardly appropriate to know such information. But strangely enough, the chief did not comment on it. "Yes, he replied. Jacob stared ahead, as if he were mentally reviewing his whole life. "Didn't your first wife want children?" Marian asked. "Yes, I didn't at the time, either," Jacob answered. "She and I were young and spoiled. Both of us from rich families wanted to have fun and enjoy life. Or rather, my wife did. I was interested in building a business at the time." "So why did you get married?" "My parents insisted. It was good for the business. Actually, I didn't mind. She was a pretty girl. I thought I'd get used to her. Well, after a few years, it became clear that we were completely different people. I got divorced and went to work." He stopped talking. "Can I have some water, please?" Jacob asked suddenly. Marian hurriedly held out the bottle. "Please," she thought, wondering for the first time in weeks what was happening to him. Jacob sipped and continued. "I don't have much to say about my second, third wives. I married them. I don't know. just for status. Young, beautiful. I thought it would be great, but every time I realized quickly that it wasn't what I wanted. And all they wanted from me was money. He fell silent again. Marian held out the water, but the old man shook his head negatively. Then there was another situation. This is what could have been true love. Your fourth wife? Marian asked. No, that was before her. I didn't marry that girl. It was a waste, as I thought many times afterwards, but I don't want to talk about it. It's too personal. And what he's telling me now isn't too personal, thought Marian, but yet for some reason he chose to share it with her. The fourth wife became more of a friend to me, Jacob said. I already knew about her diagnosis when I proposed marriage. Diagnosis? Marian asked. Yes, Samantha had cancer. In fact, she and I had known each other for years, too. Our parents had been friends since childhood. Over the years, we'd kept in touch from time to time, and then suddenly we met and talked and decided that we could spend a few years together. Were you with her all the way to the end? Marian asked. The man nodded. She was a wonderful woman and a true friend. After she died, I didn't need anyone else, Jacob said. I sympathize with you, she said sincerely. It was as if Jacob woke up. You and I have been talking, he said. Come on, let's go home. It's time for my evening pills. After this strange conversation, Marian felt sorry for her ward again. It couldn't be said that their communication improved much after that. Jacob could still speak harshly to her, but now she somehow took it easier. Summer was coming to an end, and Marian wondered what to do when the children went to school. How do you like it here? She asked them one day. I like it very much, ahead of the rest of them, Molly replied. Aunt Amanda cooks good food. Uncle Marcus takes us everywhere. There's a big garden, so we can play all day long. You have to go back to school soon, she reminded her daughter, who wrinkled her nose funny. I don't want to go to school, she said. Marian sighed and looked at her middle son. I like it here too, Alex said. But about school, I understand that, he smiled at Marian. You have to go to it. Thank God I understand you. The answer is accepted, Marian said. She shifted her gaze to her eldest son. I think you and I need to talk, Stephen said. Come on, Marian agreed. They went out into the garden. Stephen sighed. Summer's coming to an end, he said. We all have to go to school soon. We have to think about what to do about accommodation. Marian smiled. You've got a good eye for detail, as always. The son nodded. Dad called me the other day, he admitted. Marian's eyes widened. When a few days ago? Why didn't he call me? Afraid, I guess. But the official story is that he's very busy. I see, sighed Marian. What did he want? As I understand it, he wants to meet you, maybe to discuss the divorce, or, on the contrary, wants to make up. Marian laughed. Reconcile? Well, maybe. Marian hesitated, but then decided to ask her son the question. Do you want that to happen? Stephen shook his head negatively. I don't mind the younger ones seeing him if they want to. I'll see him too if I have to, but the rest is up to you. He's your father, she said, but I don't think I love him anymore, and I can't forgive him for what he did. You don't have to forgive him. As for our school, maybe we should talk to Robert now. Will he think of something? I'll try. You're the smartest, she hugged her son. Everything will be fine, he said. Tell your father I'm ready to talk to him. Let him call. Don't be afraid. I'll tell him Stephen promised. A few days later, after Marian and Jacob had finished their morning routine, Robert came in. "Ready, Jacob?" the assistant asked. "Where can I go?" The chief replied calmly. "Let's go." "Are you coming too?" Robert turned the last word to Marian. She was surprised. "She is, of course," replied the ward calmly. "I have a lot of documents to sign and some personal meetings. You could be needed at any time to change nappies or wipe armpits. I have to have some dignity. What if I have an attack at night? I don't want to suffocate in front of my business partners." As they drove to the business center where Jacob was supposed to do business, the manager explained, "We don't know exactly how long this will take. You can sit in the restaurant. It's in the same building on the top floor. Just tell him to put it on Jacob's tab." "Okay," Marian replied. "If you need anything, Robert will call," Jacob added. At the restaurant, Marian ordered tea and tiramisu. She suddenly thought it was a great opportunity to meet Matthew. He was kind of in town. Marian didn't get out here very often, and there were things she needed to discuss with her husband. She called her husband, and he was willing to come over. "What a place you picked," he said as he sat down at the table. "You look like you've lost a little weight. But you haven't changed, just like you've lost a little weight. You look amazing," he said. "Thank you," said Marian. "You too." He shrugged embarrassedly. "I'm glad you called me." Marian sighed. "We should have talked a long time ago, at least to decide when to file for divorce." Matthew frowned. "That's exactly what I wanted to talk about. It's great that we're on the same page here." He moved over and placed his hand gently on her arm. "Maybe we're being hasty," he said. "Maybe we shouldn't get divorced." "Should I not believe my ears?" Marian interrogated. "It was you who left me, wasn't it? You left a note and left without even saying goodbye to the kids. Didn't pick up the phone, didn't return messages. Just disappeared from our lives as if we were nothing to you and you hadn't lived with me for 15 years. Just came round one evening for tea." Matthew froze in embarrassment. "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't know what was wrong with me then. It was just some kind of madness. I was out of my mind." Marian sighed and released her hand to rub the bridge of her nose. "Was that it?" she asked. "I won't ask how and how much you cheated on me and why you decided to break up. I've known about it for a long time, but why couldn't you talk to me properly? Why did you abandon the children?" My husband lowered his eyes. "I know," he said. "It must have been a midlife crisis or something. It's just that at some point everything started to go crazy. Work, life, 3 kids. You're always with the kids and I'm in the background. I'm sick of the whole thing." "And your new love? Young, fun, carefree, childless?" she asked. "Sort of," he replied. "I lost my head then. I was afraid to tell you, even more so for the kids." "What changed?" she asked. Her husband moved closer. "I've realized in these months how much I've missed you and the children," he said. "And I want things to go back to the way they were." Marian shook her head slowly. "Nothing has changed," she said. "We'll get back together. In a couple of weeks you'll go off with another girl." "No, I won't do that," Matthew assured her. Marian sighed. "Jaroslav," she said, "I've had a lot of time to think about it, and I've realized that I can't forgive you, and my love for you has disappeared in that time too. I'm sorry, but I think we need to agree and decide when we go to file for divorce." Her husband's face suddenly changed. Marian suddenly saw clearly how his contrived tenderness and remorse came off. "Then we must talk about the division of property," he said in a harsh tone. Marian was surprised at this abrupt change of subject. In fact, it amused her. "Let's talk," she agreed. "Your car goes to you. My flat goes to me and the kids." Matthew shook his head. "No, let's sell it and split the money in half." Half Marian smiled. "I'm raising 3 kids on my own." Her husband was embarrassed, but he continued to stand his ground. "I was paying her mortgage. And you didn't work? Sitting on my back?" "Yes, because I was taking care of the house and the 3 kids. And now I'm paying the mortgage. You left me out of the blue and didn't even help the kids. You can't imagine what I've been through these past few months." "Well, then we'll get back together." The husband returned to the old topic. "And we won't have to share the flat." Marian sighed. "No, Matthew, I've already said everything." "So you have," her husband's voice suddenly lowered like a snake's hiss. "And who will need you alone with 3 children? Do you think any man but me will look at you? You stupid pet chicken. All you know how to do is cook soup." Marian felt tears coming from her eyes. It hurt her to hear such words from the father of her children, from the man she had loved for so many years. "Let's not play innocent," her husband continued. "You yourself will come to me on your knees." She will not, said a familiar male voice behind her. She did not have time to see what happened next. Only Matthew suddenly flew across the restaurant and collapsed to the floor. Robert shook the hand that had just collided with her husband's jaw. "That was harsh, but I guess it was understandable," Jacob commented. Marian looked up and saw the supervisor. He looked as pleased as a cat for some reason. "And you're here?" she asked in amazement. "Everyone heard," he said rather dryly. Matthew rose slowly from the floor. He pressed his palm to his bloody lips. "We'll talk to you again," he threw to Marian. "Wow," Jacob said admiringly. "I should get out of the office more often. This place is fun." "Shall we go home?" Robert asked Marian. "We will," she answered quietly, wiping away her tears. She was sent to Camila's kitchen to drink tea and calm down. "We have something to discuss with the boss," Robert said. "You get some rest. I'll call you." But Marian had no appetite. She was replaying in her head what had happened in the restaurant. What's going to happen now? Will she be fired? Probably get fired. Jacob hardly needs a problem employee getting his assistant into fights in the middle of the business center. And what about the flat? Do we have to split it in half? Where will she and the kids live then? What if she has to find a new job, even if she doesn't get fired today? The school issue hasn't been canceled. With so many problems, Marian's head was spinning. "Marian, let's go," she raised her head. Robert's face didn't make it clear what judgment she had been given, so she stood up and obediently walked with him into the chief's office. "What a show you put on today," Marian, Jacob said cheerfully. "I'm sorry," said Marian. "I didn't know that was going to happen." "Well, it was kind of funny," the chief said. "We have other things on the agenda." Marian squirmed. Now he was going to tell her everything. "Do you want to continue working here?" Jacob asked. "Are you firing me?" Marian asked. "Do you want to?" "No," she answered quickly. "Then I'm not." Goody nodded. "Soon your children will have to go to school." "Yes," Marian confirmed cautiously. Jacob nodded. "We'll get them a car and a driver," Robert said, "to take them to school and bring them back." Marian opened her mouth. "But why?" she asked. "Because I don't want to look for a new employee," the chief replied calmly. "Thank you," Marian muttered. "And we also need to solve the housing issue. Robert added. What about it? She wondered. Living in the outhouse in the winter is an option, Jacob said. It's warm and everything, but it's not very comfortable to run out in the cold for breakfast. So let's look at your new rooms. New rooms? Marian shook her head incredulously. There is an almost empty wing in the house, Robert explained. That's where we intend to put you. They left the study and went in the direction of rooms where Marian had never been before. What wing is this? She asked curiously. Jacob sighed. It's a part of my past, he said. I wanted to forget it, not remember it. But now I realize it's time to let go of the past and look to the future. They went into the largest room. This is the common room, said the chief. From here there are 4 bedrooms. There's enough for you. Marian walked around in surprise, looking round the rooms. Each room looked like a separate work of art. Beautiful, tastefully chosen furniture, paintings on the walls, everything is thought out to the smallest detail. Except it looked like it hadn't been used in years. I wonder why, Marian thought. Suddenly she saw under the white cloth the outline of an object from her childhood. A grand piano. Marian exclaimed in amazement. May I? She turned to Jacob. He shrugged his shoulders. Marian carefully removed the white cloth that covered the instrument and ran her fingers over the keys. The instrument was a little distressed, but it was quite playable. Marian sat down. And she began to play the only tune she could remember, the one her mother had played, and many, many times since she was a little girl. The first few notes were difficult, but then her hands remembered it, and her fingers flew over the keys with ease. She sat with her back to Jacob and didn't see the change in the old man's face. First he stretched it out in astonishment. Then he turned his head, as if he wanted to make sure his hearing wasn't deceiving him. Then a tear rolled out of his right eye, then another from his left. Robert walked quietly over to the piano and stood facing Marian. He looked at her, and then suddenly he looked at the chief and couldn't hold back his astonished cry. Jacob, what's the matter with you? Marian immediately stopped, turned round in amazement. The old man was sobbing unashamedly and wiping his face with his shirt sleeve. How do you know that tune? He asked. It was composed just for me. When Jacob was calmed down by the joint efforts of Marian and Robert, the chief asked for tea to be served to everyone. They returned to his office, and there the chief began his story. When I met Vivian, he began, I was still married to my 3rd wife. She and I hardly ever saw each other even then. We only met to discuss how we were going to divide the property. He sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Anyway, I was getting really tired of it. Work, divorce. One day I just walked out of a business meeting, let the driver go, and just went to the park, sat on a bench, and realized how nice it was. Just sunshine, birds singing, trees turning green. And then I saw her, Vivienne. Marian froze. Her heart was beating very fast. She couldn't believe what was happening. So beautiful. I've never seen such a beautiful woman, Jacob said dreamily. And then she looked at me and smiled. And I knew I was lost. Marian saw Robert looking at her and smiling. When he noticed her gaze, he seemed confused and started to look at his boss, who seemed to be oblivious to his surroundings. He was completely immersed in the memory of events that had taken place over 35 years ago. My feet led me to it, Jacob continued. And for the first time in my life, I was scared. I was so afraid she'd refuse to meet me. I'd been with a lot of women, but none of them had ever struck such awe in me. At first sight, to my delight, she said yes. He smiled blissfully. I've probably never been so happy. My wife and I were no longer living together. And so I brought Vivienne into this house and made this wing just for her. It's the sunniest side of the house, and the piano. She played for you. Yes, Marion interrupted him hoarsely. Vivian taught music, and that tune you played she composed especially for me. Why did you break up? Marion asked. Another tear rolled down Jacob's face. A fool, because he said calmly. I wanted to marry Vivian, and she refused me. Why? Marion asked. He sighed. Said we were from different worlds, that she didn't want to turn into just a rich businessman's wife and stay at home. That's how it is, muttered Marion. Yes, I persuaded her. I told her she could do whatever she wanted and be herself. She refused and ended our relationship first. Then why do you say it was your fault? Marion asked. Jacob sighed. Because I didn't insist. Because I gave in easily, because I didn't find out then that she was pregnant. Marion looked up at him. Jacob was looking straight at her. Yes, he said calmly. I'm sure you're my daughter. Marion stretched her legs blissfully and lifted her head, letting the sun shine on her face. She liked it here. The sea had always done her good, especially now that they got out there as a family every year. Mum, did you see it? Molly came running up to her. I swam the fastest. No, you didn't, shouted the middle son. It was obvious that he was tired and shutting down, but he was showing that he was inferior to his younger sister, who had been going swimming for 3 years and was performing well. He didn't mean to. I just gave in to you, Alex stated. Yeah, sure, the girl blurted out. She was already well aware of her own abilities and knew that her brother was swimming at full strength. Alex ran off resentfully towards the cabin. And you had to tease him, Marion gently reprimanded him. He wanted to compete. What am I supposed to do now? Go take a shower, we'll go to dinner soon. When her daughter ran away, she stretched, reluctantly got up from the sunbed and walked towards the cabin. She saw Stephen lying in the hammock, talking on the phone as usual. Talking to his girlfriend again, thought Marion. What's her name? It's either Jennifer or Ashley. He's all grown up now. In half an hour, she said to her son, and he nodded, showing that he had heard his mother's words. It was cool in the spacious cabin. Jacob and Robert were sitting in the living room playing chess, as usual. We're going home in 3 days, and you haven't even burned, Marion sighed. She gently ruffled her husband's hair and kissed her father on the cheek. Don't worry, Marion, he replied. We'll make it. How is the sea? The water is warm, replied Marion. How's the game? A draw, replied father with a sigh. After all, Robert adopts from me not only the nuances of managing the company, but also the ability to play chess. Robert smiled. I learned from the best, Jacob, he said to his father-in-law. Checkmate to you, by the way. Oh, you, Jacob cursed. Grandfather Molly appeared out of nowhere. What does that mean? She asked. Jacob coughed embarrassedly. It means, young lady, he said with feigned sternness, that you're not legally allowed to say that for another 8 years. We have worse swearing at school, Molly said, laughing and running off to the shower. Change schools, Jacob said firmly. I won't have my only granddaughter using that kind of language. Marion walked over to her father and kissed him on the top of his head. Then you'll have to change Grandpa, she said, because he's the one Molly hears it most often. That's a fair point, sighed her father. That's a fair point, Dad sighed. I'll try not to swear so much. Marion smiled and looked out to sea. Through the transparent panoramic wall of their cottage, she could see the huge red sun slipping into the sunset. It's nice, she said, turning to Robert, who came over and hugged her from behind. "I always feel good with you," replied her husband. "Me too," said Marian. "And I'm perfectly happy." "I'm pregnant by your husband." After learning of her husband and sister's betrayal, Jennifer left for the country. And barely. Jennifer was just leaving the clinic when she got a call from her younger sister. "Hi, what are you doing?" Her sister's voice vibrated with joy, which was very audible even over the phone. "I just got off work," Jennifer replied tiredly. "I'm getting off work. I'm going to drive home and sleep it off." "Listen, sister, Maggie said. "It's the same thing every day. Aren't you tired of living such a boring life yourself?" Jennifer gritted her teeth to keep herself from saying something sarcastic to Maggie. No, she'd always been able to keep her temper in check with her younger sister. But lately, apparently because of the increased workload and the unstable family situation, Jennifer was beginning to feel her nerves fraying. "Aren't you tired of telling me the same thing every time?" she said. Jennifer got into the car and switched on the ignition. She wanted to go home, have a cup of tea, take a bath, and then crawl into bed with a blanket over her head. "Well, I'm sorry," Maggie said in a softer voice now. "No offense. I just wanted to ask you something." "I didn't even doubt it," Jennifer thought to herself with annoyance. Then she turned on the car's heater. It was the middle of October outside. By 7 p.m., it was very dark outside, and it was also very cold, which was not conducive to a better mood and the desire to do anything but relax. "Did you ask me not to drag this out?" Jennifer said. "More money?" Maggie clucked her tongue. "I haven't asked you for money in a long time." "What are you saying to me, Jen?" "No, I wanted to ask you for your suitcase. Can you lend it to me for about a week? Well, 10 days tops." "Are you going somewhere?" asked the older sister, more out of politeness than genuine interest. "Yes, I'm going to the sea," Maggie answered cheerfully. "Unlike you, my plans are not all about work and home. You're the one who has always lived a boring and proper life." Jennifer remained silent. Indeed, she had always tried to live right. But did it really look boring from the outside? Perhaps for a 23-year-old girl, life between home and work does seem gray and dull. But that was Jennifer's life before marriage. Maybe she really is living life the wrong way. Von Bridget is constantly traveling somewhere and manages to work, and her personal life is boiling. And Jennifer, right after graduation, got married, got a job at the clinic, and since then in her life almost nothing has happened. Early rise in the morning, then the road to work, then the reception of patients from morning to lunch. In the afternoon, work with documents or visits to patients at home. Even on weekends, Jennifer managed to work in a private clinic. When she was on holiday, she either went on training courses or spent time at seminars and conferences. For her almost 30 years of life, she has never been to the sea, did not fly on a plane on holiday, did not buy herself a beautiful swimming costume. I guess her life really was boring and dull. Line. Maggie even giggled into the phone. "Can you hear me? I need a suitcase." "You're always going on holiday," Jennifer replied, distracted from her sad thoughts. "Don't you have a suitcase?" Can you believe it? Maggie kept talking into the phone, unable to get a word in edgewise. "On my last trip, my suitcase was dropped when I was reloading my luggage. It cracked, and I haven't been able to buy a new one since." You bet, Jennifer thought to herself, sighing and listening to the complaining speech. You go to resorts several times a year. You don't even have time to buy a suitcase between trips. And then she suddenly regretted it and scolded herself for being too hard on her younger sister. After all, it wasn't Maggie's fault that Jennifer preferred work to leisure and could afford regular trips to the sea. "When can I come to your place to pick up my suitcase?" Maggie asked, again forcing Jennifer to switch her thoughts. "You can come whenever you want to come." "Tomorrow," said her sister cheerfully. "I don't suppose you're in any condition to receive guests today?" "Yes, tomorrow afternoon would be better. Tomorrow's Saturday. I'll be seeing patients at the clinic until 3, so come after 3. "That's fine. Thank you." The nurse chirped something else into the phone, musing about how her trip was going so well. Autumn was setting in outside. She'd be going to some hot country, splashing in the warm sea, and she wouldn't have to freeze in the city until the heating came back on. Jennifer got home at about 8 o'clock. She entered the empty flat, found the light switch in the hallway by feel, and switched on the light. She sat down on the banquette by the entrance, stretched her legs out. She sighed heavily. How lonely it was on nights like this, when Winston was late at work and Jennifer had to return to the empty, dark flat. How many times she'd wanted a cat or a dog, but then she'd talked herself out of it because she realized that, because she and her husband were always busy at work, it would be hard for the poor creature to sit alone and cooped up for long hours. She took her phone out of her coat pocket. Jennifer dialed Winston's number. She didn't expect her husband to answer immediately, or that he would answer her call at all. Sure enough, the phone rang with long beeps, and her husband never answered. After preparing a quick dinner and taking a shower, Jennifer looked longingly at her mobile phone screen. Her husband never called back or even texted. Jennifer, trained by life experience, realized that it was useless to wait for a call from her eternally busy spouse. Winston, the head of the department at the regional hospital, was busy 24 hours a day. He could have an emergency operation, some urgent concilium that required his obligatory participation. There could have been a meeting. All in all, Jennifer had long since become accustomed to the fact that her husband was a very busy man. She didn't work and didn't voice her opinion on the matter. Already falling asleep in bed after a hot shower and dinner, Jennifer heard the phone ring. It was Winston calling. "I'm just leaving work." Jennifer jumped up sharply in bed and looked at the wall clock. It was past 11 o'clock in the evening. She hadn't noticed herself falling into slumber. "I'm waiting for you. Shall I heat up dinner?" Jennifer asked. "No need. I had a snack at work. We had a meeting. Everyone was hungry by then, so we decided we'd order pizza. Anyway, I've eaten so I don't have to bother reheating the food." Jennifer breathed a sigh of relief. By the time her husband arrived home, she had a headache. So after waiting for Winston, she immediately fell asleep, not really knowing what the head of the department was so late for. In the morning, when she awoke, she found her husband no longer at home. Hopelessness, longing came over Jennifer. She ate breakfast and stared out the window alone. Then she started to get ready for her part-time job at a private clinic. For more than 5 years, Jennifer had been working as a general practitioner at the city's polyclinic, while managing patients at private clinics. She enjoyed her work, especially when she saw the results of her labor and heard the words of gratitude from her patients. Everything was going well in her work. And even despite all the difficulties, Jennifer always came out of work satisfied with herself and the results of her work. As for her personal life, then everything was not as simple as we would like. Jennifer's husband, Winston Kudryashov, was older than his wife for 20 years, and for 15 years he had been the head of a department at the regional hospital. As a specialist, Winston enjoyed high prestige, had behind his back a huge professional experience, thousands of grateful patients, and a lot of awards. Jennifer felt like a girl next to him, and given the difference in age, experience in both professional and life, the young wife only had to listen to the opinion of her wise husband. "Why are you marrying such an old man?" Jennifer was asked by her mate Maggie. "Is it a duty? Winston is almost 45, he's older than you, and he's older than you, and he's a doctor. so you'll be in constant competition. He's bound to always be better than you. He is the best for me, Jennifer replied with a smile. I love this man very much. You have no idea how strong my feelings for him are. She was 24 years old at the time. She was in her final year of medical school, and Winston, in her eyes, was a medical guru. Jennifer even then looked into the mouth of her future husband, listened to his advice, listened to stories from practice, and believed that fate has made her a real gift in the form of meeting and mutual sympathy with such an intelligent, beautiful, and very responsive man. They met when Jennifer was 20 years old. Winston had already turned 40. She was in her third year of university, and he was consulting teachers at the university and lectured for a while on obstetrics and gynecology. Jennifer met Winston in the library. He was just dictating to one of the students a list of literature required for the course. Jennifer went there to prepare for the seminar. "Young lady, you're wasting your time in this library," Winston addressed her when she asked the librarian to look for an ophthalmology textbook for her. "Why wasted?" Jennifer looked up in surprise at the man she had often met in the walls of her university. Winston did not lecture at them, but the girl had seen his picture in the hall and knew exactly who he was. Because the university's library is sparse on teaching materials. In terms of terminology, I advise you to buy your textbooks from a bookstore. Or better yet, order them online, Winston replied. "That's a strange suggestion from you," Jennifer grinned. "Usually our library gets all the praise, and you say the exact opposite." "I just always tell the truth," Winston said. Winston grinned, then winked at the librarian. "And don't look at me like that, Rachel. Am I wrong? Your library's been short on manuals for a long time," he said. "You're right, Winston," she sighed. Jennifer took a couple of textbooks. As she left the library, she ran into Winston again. "Will you take my advice?" he asked. Jennifer looked at Winston in surprise. "What kind of advice? Go to the shop or order online?" "Well, going to the shop and choosing the textbook you want would be faster. While you're waiting for the online order, it might not be relevant to you." Jennifer shrugged her shoulders. "Well, I'll go to the bookshop then. Can I give you a lift?" Jennifer was taken aback. She had never once spoken to this man. She hadn't even paid attention to him, thinking he was too experienced and not interested in talking to young female students. Winston's question, however, confused her. She looked at him incredulously, then nodded suddenly. "Okay, bring me in." From that day on, communication began between them. At first, it was just idle chatter, not so much about medicine, but about the lives of students and faculty, Jennifer's childhood and Winston's adolescence. It turned out that the man had been married once. My ex-wife herself filed for divorce because of eternal employment, and I did not keep around a woman who was far from medicine and considered my work frivolous, said Winston. She was not ready to wait for me in the evenings and wanted me to socialize with other women, jealous of them and of my work too. But as a gynecologist, how could I restrict myself from socializing with the female sex? It's my job, my duty, my life after all. And then I realized that I could only live with a woman who, like me, has something to do with medicine, who would be sympathetic to my late returns and would not make hysterics and scandals about it. "Is that so much to ask, Jennifer?" Winston asked. Jennifer shook her head at the sound of her name in Winston's mouth. Goosebumps ran down her spine. She looked at the man differently now. In him, Jennifer saw a kindred spirit, someone close to her in spirit. Even more so. The thought that she could become a doctor and even his wife in the future made her sweetly dizzy. In the meantime, their relationship had moved to a new level, and now Jennifer often stayed overnight in Winston's flat. She felt relaxed and confident around this man. She knew that Winston was old enough and experienced enough. He would not hurt her, always support her, and also help her with her studies and explain simple truths. In general, the girl was happy, but to the last did not believe that Winston could make her a proposal. Arriving home to her parents in a small provincial town 250 kilometers from the regional center where she studied, Jennifer immediately told the truth about her relationship with a man who was almost twice her age. "Are you crazy?" Her mother rounded her eyes and clutched her head. "You are 23 years old and he is 43. 20 years is almost a lifetime. 2 decades. Jennifer's father wasn't thrilled with his daughter's choice, but he was sympathetic to her feelings. "Sharon, why do you resent it so much? There are a million families in the world, and they're strong enough, where the husband is older than his wife. It would be worse if it were the other way round. And Jennifer would be the guy who fell in love with an old aunt," he said. "Dad, Winston is not old," Jennifer interceded for her lover. "He's mature, he's wise, he's very experienced." "What kind of doctor is he?" asked her mother. "I'm glad your Winston is a good doctor," she said, her lips tightening. "But it would be good if he was your age, not 20 years older. 80, this is a disaster." Edward only hummed, without saying anything else. After a while, Jennifer dared to invite Winston to her parents' house for a visit. They came along with a cake and a bouquet of flowers. And then Marion melted, seeing before her a manly and intelligent man. Edic also did not say another word about what he thought about the choice of his daughter. Then Jennifer finally realized that Winston was the man with whom she would be truly happy. Maggie, however, when she saw what a grown-up groom her older sister had brought into the house, did not keep silent. "He's an old man," wrinkled nose said 17-year-old Maggie when she and her sister were alone. "What do you need it for?" Jennifer wanted to take offense at her sister's words, but then she managed to resist the urge and smiled softly. "You're not the one who has to live with him. What am I, you crying about him being old for me?" Maggie twitched her nose upwards and wrinkled it funny again. "Well, he's going to be a relative of mine. You look at him like you want to eat him. I'm sure you're already dreaming of marriage and a long life with that old man." "Don't call him that," Jennifer said, feeling herself getting angry with her younger sister. "He's not an old man. He's only 20 years older than I am. When you choose a fiancé, you can choose your own, but don't meddle in my affairs." "Your choice." Maggie shrugged her shoulders. "But sooner or later you'll regret marrying such an old man." Her younger sister's words were not prophetic. And not once in almost 6 years of married life Jennifer did not regret that she agreed to become Winston's wife. He proposed to her in her 5th year. Then Jennifer moved into his spacious 2-bedroom flat. Soon received a diploma, got a job in the clinic, and was going to enter the residency. When her parents came to visit their daughter for the first time after the wedding, they no longer opposed Jennifer's choice, but on the contrary, they were happy that the girl so successfully married and settled in the regional center. "First impressions are deceiving," Marion grinned, strolling through the huge 3-bedroom apartment in the center of town. "Winston turned out to be a very nice man. He paid for the wedding and brought you to his place. Hang on to him, daughter. He's a good man." "I know," Jennifer said with a smile. She was in love, happy and ready to move mountains. Being a doctor was a pleasure. Jennifer was sure that she had found a job she liked, and the results of her work pleased her, and each time convinced Jennifer that she had done the right thing. The only thing that confused the young wife of the famous gynecologist was that Winston constantly discouraged her from entering the residency. "Don't you like being a general practitioner?" he asked. "You're all glowing. You're happy to be working. So why go to school and waste your time doing it?" Jennifer didn't argue with her husband because she wasn't used to it. Winston's word was always paramount to her. So after a few months of thinking about her future, Jennifer decided that she would stay on as a general practitioner in a regular clinic. Her friends who had gone to university with her only shrugged their shoulders as they listened to Jennifer's explanations for her refusal to continue her studies. "Don't you think your Winston is just afraid of competition?" one of her former classmates once asked Jennifer. "You'll become a subspecialist and overshadow him with your practice." "You what?" Jennifer only laughed as she listened to her friend's words. "Winston is too experienced and wise enough to be afraid of competition. Besides, he's a gynecologist, which is not my field of expertise." "Are you always defending him?" grinned her mate. "You're used to the fact that he controls you in everything. He makes you dance to his tune. Personally, I'd be offended if my husband behaved like that." "That's why Winston's my husband, not yours." Jennifer tried to make a joke, but she was suddenly uncomfortable. What if there was truth in her friend's words? What if Winston was afraid that his wife might be better than him? Jennifer carefully avoided these thoughts. She didn't want to think badly of her husband. She loved him too much. 2 years after the marriage was registered, Jennifer thought about having a child. She was already 26. Her husband was an excellent gynecologist, and she had no fears about motherhood. "Winston," she said, trying not to make the words sound like a decision she'd made alone, "do you want children?" Winston looked at his wife somewhat distantly, as if Jennifer had started a conversation off topic. "Honey, why are you asking me that? You're 26 years old. It's too young to be thinking about this." "It is." Jennifer was annoyed by Winston's words. "I'm 26 years old, which is the right age to have a baby. You don't have children from your first marriage. Maybe it's time to become a father." There was so much hope and anticipation in Jennifer's voice that she could barely contain her emotions. As for Winston, it was as if he had no desire to become a father. "It's too early. Do your work. You need to make a name for yourself to be able to advance in the future." "But how am I going to get ahead if I'm just going to sit in a regular GP's office?" "You're the one who talked me out of going to school, and now you're talking me out of having a baby." Jennifer didn't notice that she had spoken with resentment in her voice, and she stopped when she saw her husband's stern look. "It's not time yet," Jennifer Winston said. And that was the end of the matter. Jennifer, unused to arguing with her husband because of his unwavering authority and age, had given herself her word that she would not bring up any more talk that displeased Winston. But Marian was not afraid to ask her eldest daughter such questions. "Do you and Winston think about children at all?" The question was painful, and Jennifer even wrinkled her nose at the unpleasant feeling inside. She and Winston had never revisited the topic of future parenthood, and what to answer her mother, Jennifer did not know. She was used to telling everyone the truth: her husband, her family, her colleagues, and her patients. But now that the question touched on such a painful subject, Jennifer didn't know how she could gently skirt the sharp edges. "It's too early for us. I'm working. Winston's working. There's plenty of time," she said. "I wouldn't say that." Marian objected, looking closely at her daughter's face. "You'll be 30 soon. And you say it's early. I gave birth to you when I was 23. And that wasn't considered too early to give birth. It's harder to have a baby after 30. There's more pain and less time. What am I explaining to you? You're a doctor yourself." Jennifer was ashamed to admit to her mother that her husband didn't want children and thought it was too early for them to become parents. Winston was about to turn 50. That was a decent enough age for a man, especially one who had no children yet. Jennifer honestly didn't understand why her husband was so resistant to the idea of children, not interested in her women's health or trying to strengthen their family. It was getting harder and harder to return home. No one was waiting for Jennifer there. She longed for a husband who was always late at work. She even began to understand the first wife of Winston, who complained about the constant absences of her husband from home and filed for divorce because of his eternal employment. But when Jennifer remembered Winston's words about how much he wanted to meet someone who would understand him and not complain about his passion for work, she immediately tried to ward off the thought of resenting her husband for his devotion to his favorite work. Having calmed down a little mentally, Jennifer decided that she didn't want to get herself worked up anymore, that she had chosen the fate of being the wife of the head of one of the departments of a regional hospital. So it was not worth complaining about her plight or berating Winston for her constant absence from home and being in the hospital. After her appointment at the private clinic, she dialed her husband's number. "Where are you?" "Still in the hospital." Jennifer asked the questions automatically, subconsciously guessing what Winston would answer her. "I'm at home, cooking dinner," her husband answered, and Jennifer's heart jumped joyfully in her chest. She'd been telling herself that Winston didn't want to be home with her, that he was looking for any excuse to stay late at work, and that he'd neglected his chores. "You surprised me," Jennifer said with undisguised joy. "What are you cooking?" "You'll find out when you get home," Winston laughed. "Maybe I want to surprise you? It won't be a surprise." Jennifer thought with awe of how wonderful her husband was. She was lucky, after all. And even though they were so rarely together, he was and still was the best man on the planet. As she entered the flat, she heard Winston's voice and someone else's female laughter. It wasn't until a moment later that Jennifer realized exactly where she had heard that laughter. It was her younger sister, Maggie, laughing. Jennifer remembered that Maggie was supposed to pick up her suitcase, but her sister usually called or texted her. She'd arrived without a call or a text. "Oh, sister." "Hello," Maggie waved to Jennifer without rising from her chair in the kitchen. "I thought I'd never see you again. Why didn't you call me?" Jennifer didn't like the fact that Maggie showed up at her house unannounced. "Why?" Maggie wondered. But the smile flickered off her lips. "You told me to come round after 3. I did. We never said we'd call or text." Jennifer didn't know why she resented her little sister's arrival so much. Maggie didn't seem to have done anything wrong. She had arrived on time, and they hadn't really agreed to call in advance. But for some reason, her sister's smile, her happy face, and her contented look caused Jennifer to feel a rush of negativity. "What's wrong with me?" Jennifer asked herself that question, but she had no answer. Maggie hadn't annoyed her this much before, even though she didn't always watch her words and sometimes offended Jennifer. Maggie was the exact opposite of her older sister. Daring, self-assured, self-loving, and not tolerating objections, and Jennifer was malleable, kind, and non-confrontational. It was easier for her to agree than to argue to the point of frothing at the mouth. Maggie liked to argue, refute, prove her point of view, even if it was obvious that it was wrong. Winston set the table. By the time his wife returned from work, he had prepared fish and salad. Jennifer looked at the utensils Winston was setting on the table, but she couldn't remember the last time her husband had cooked anything himself. It had happened, but only at the beginning of the relationship, when Jennifer was still living in his flat as his wife-to-be. As soon as they legalized their relationship, all the duties of cooking, cleaning, laundry, and other household chores were fully transferred to the newly married wife of Winston. "Are you guys going on holiday?" Maggie asked in a cheerful voice. Jennifer heard a kind of gloating in her sister's question. Maggie regularly went on holiday with different men and in different countries, often allowed herself to go abroad alone. Jennifer, on the other hand, had never been to another country in her nearly 30 years of life. "We don't have time for holidays," she said, trying to keep her voice calm and confident. "We are working. You're the free-flying one." "That's right," Maggie smiled broadly. "I know how to take everything in life, and you all work and work until you retire. Is that how you're going to live?" Jennifer glanced at her husband sitting next to her. Winston was eating his fish with a nonchalant face, as if he wasn't even listening to what the women were saying at the table. "We're not." Jennifer rose abruptly from the table. "Have you eaten? Go get your suitcase." Maggie's face changed instantly. The smile fell from her lips, her eyebrows furrowed. The younger sister clearly hadn't expected such blatant inhospitality from her older sister. "Jennifer, what are you doing?" She pouted. "I'm not bragging or making fun of your lifestyle." "Well, you like to work. I don't mind." "Of course you do," Jennifer snorted. "Get your bags. Go and get ready for your next holiday. I'm very tired. Tomorrow is my only day off and I really want to rest at least that day." Maggie was clearly offended. She thanked Winston dryly for lunch, then took her suitcase and, after a brief goodbye to Jennifer, left the house. Winston was silent the whole time and expressed no emotion. Suddenly he asked, "What are you doing? What, did she do something bad to you?" "What makes you think that?" "It's just that she takes up a lot of my time, effort, and energy. I'm tired, Winston. I wanted to spend this weekend with you, and here's Maggie and her stories about her trouble-free life." Winston grinned. "Are you jealous or something?" Jennifer felt a chill run down her spine. Her husband, who had always been characterized by his independence of opinion and lack of any emotion towards outsiders, had suddenly asked a rather strange question. A question that made Jennifer suddenly feel ashamed. Really, is it envy? Maggie was usually jealous of her older sister because she had things Maggie didn't have, opportunities Maggie didn't have due to her age. Guys who liked her older sister better than her younger sister. Jennifer was always one step ahead. And by the time she was 30, it suddenly slowed down and Maggie began to pull ahead in the quality of her life. She wasn't burdened with work, liked men, handled them skillfully, getting everything she needed and more. Jennifer seemed to be mired in her gray and boring life with nothing but work and love for her husband. Her mood had completely soured after her sister left. And even though Winston stayed at home and was not going anywhere for work, Jennifer constantly replayed in her head her dialogue with Maggie. And why did her older sister have so much negativity inside her towards her younger sister? They had been communicating less and less lately. It had been fine at first. As soon as Maggie moved to New York, she was constantly asking to borrow money or to sleep over at Jennifer and Winston's flat. In the last 2 years, Maggie had become quite independent of both her parents and her older sister. "I completely forgot to tell you," Winston distracted his wife from sad thoughts. "On Tuesday, I'm leaving for a scientific and practical congress on obstetrics and gynecology. It turns out that I was scheduled to attend the congress, but I got so busy that I forgot about it." "That's strange." Jennifer looked at her husband in surprise. "Usually you prepare for congresses in advance. Suddenly you seem to have changed your attitude to such events." Winston brushed it off. "Work's a mess. People are quitting in droves and going to private clinics. I've lost track of time. HR called me last night and reminded me about the trip." "Where are you going?" Jennifer suddenly had a brilliant idea in her voice. What if she went to the Congress with her husband, took a few days off at work, spent time with Winston, and generally changed the environment? The idea was reckless, unusual for Jennifer. But she, annoyed by the meeting and conversation with her younger sister, suddenly also wanted to change something in her life. "To Boston," Winston said, "for 5 days." Jennifer smiled. "What if I come with you, take a leave of absence at my own expense, and we'll go to Boston together? I'll walk around the city waiting for you. We'll go to restaurants, visit a museum, go to the theater. Do you remember the last time we went out together?" Winston shook his head. "The Congress will go on from morning until late at night, and I won't have time to go to the theaters and restaurants," Winston said. "You're going to be upset, and you're going to tug at me and keep asking me when I'm coming to see you. I'll piss you off with my absence, and our mini holiday will be a nightmare. I've been through this before, honey, and I don't want it again." Jennifer looked at her husband, as if he were directly discouraging her from traveling together. Not once in the 6 years they had been together had she said a word of reproach to him. Not once had she held him or made a scandal of his prolonged absences. Why now Winston spoke as if he did not know his wife at all, as if she in his eyes had turned into his ex-wife, whom he tried with all his might to forget. "Winston, don't you want me to come with you?" Jennifer asked uncertainly, still hoping she was imagining it. "I do," Winston said hotly. He jumped up from the couch where he'd been sitting watching TV, running around the living room with his arms crossed behind his back. Jennifer watched her husband, as if she didn't recognize him as the man she had loved for so many years. "But I also want to work in peace, without the distraction of worrying about you sitting in a foreign city waiting for me. I want to meet my colleagues, chat with my professors. I want to get some sleep, after all." "Okay," Jennifer interrupted Winston and nodded briefly. "Please, just don't be so nervous. Let it be as you say." Winston abruptly stopped talking, sat down on the sofa and continued watching some medical TV program. Jennifer sat next to him and occasionally glanced at her husband, but it was as if he didn't see her. They used to sit and watch TV together like this, but now they had become complete strangers to each other. No children together, no jointly acquired property, no desire to go out and spend time together. Maybe this is the end of our marriage? Jennifer thought bitterly. He does not even want to hug me, kiss me. And we haven't had intimacy in almost a month. My husband hasn't laid a finger on me in a month, and that thought made me feel even more miserable. It seemed as if the whole world called family, so lovingly maintained for 6 years, had collapsed. Winston left on Tuesday, and up to that point nothing at all had changed in their relationship with Jennifer. The spouse no longer initiated intimacy. Jennifer kept looking at Winston, trying to figure out if he'd really lost interest in her, or if she was just imagining the problem. "There's no need to see me off," her husband said at once. "I'll go straight from the hospital to the airport. 5 days will fly by, and I'll be sure to bring you a present from Boston. Would you like that, honey?" "Of course I do," Jennifer said, and smiled a strained smile. The mood had been bad for a long time, and the situation with her husband's departure had spoiled it even more. Now Winston had asked her not to walk him to the airport, even though Jennifer couldn't do that. She worked until 3, and Winston's plane was due to leave at 5. Returning to the empty flat became a complete drag for Jennifer. She tried to stay late at work, pretending to work on paperwork and reports while she tried to stretch her time so she could get home as late as possible. The clinic closed at 8 p.m., and by that time Jennifer had to go home anyway, having vacated her office. To distract herself and not go crazy with boredom, Jennifer even signed up for yoga. She decided that she would attend a yoga studio in the evenings instead of coming home. It was both good for her health and a way to pass the time. When Jennifer returned from her first class on Thursday, she felt much better. She seemed to be energized after the workout. Her muscles were humming nicely and her body felt pleasantly tired. She wanted to go to bed as soon as possible, so that the day would be over. The sooner it was over, the sooner the new one would come. It wouldn't be long before Winston returned. Lying in bed under a blanket and looking at her social networking page, Jennifer saw Maggie's holiday photos. Her younger sister posed against the sea, standing in a brightly colored swimming costume. Jennifer quickly woke up looking at the pictures, trying not to dwell on the unpleasant thoughts that had arisen in her head. Enviously again, she thought, and quickly refreshed her social media page so that the pictures of her beautiful and happy little sister would disappear from her sight as soon as possible. However, updating the page, Jennifer suddenly noticed something unpleasantly cutting her eyes on one of the photos published by Maggie. Returning to her sister's page, Jennifer scrutinized Maggie's postings once more and then zoomed in on one of the photos. Her heart twitched unpleasantly in her chest. Her palms instantly sweated with excitement. In one of Maggie's photos, Jennifer saw a familiar figure in the reflection of a shop window. It was the figure of her husband, who had personally taken the photograph for the young girl. Jennifer enlarged the photo once more to make sure again that it was Winston. She recognized his figure, his hair, even his sunglasses. He was also wearing the plaid shirt Maggie had given him for the holiday. Back then, Jennifer had wanted to give that shirt to her father, but Winston had persuaded her to keep the gift. Maggie gave the shirt to me. Why should I give it to your dad? Winston asked unhappily. Because it doesn't suit you, Jennifer replied. Jennifer didn't know why she was suddenly so attracted to Maggie's gift. Maybe it was because the shirt fit Winston so well. Jennifer herself had never guessed his taste. Her husband always dressed himself in the shops. He picked out his own shirts, trousers, jeans. He even bought his own underwear. And then some Maggie gave him a nice gift that Winston liked. Jennifer was nervous at the time. She was uncomfortable that her husband openly admired Maggie's taste. But he had a very different opinion of his own wife's taste. Until the last moment, Jennifer didn't want to believe that Winston was in the photograph. Then suddenly she remembered how her husband didn't want her to go to Boston with him, how he refused to let his wife accompany him to the airport. And that dinner he'd cooked, supposedly for his wife, had probably been prepared solely in honor of Maggie's arrival. Jennifer grabbed the phone in her hands and dialed Winston's number. The caller is temporarily unavailable, an automated female voice answered. If Winston was in the United States, he would be in touch, but Jennifer's husband was in Greece. Of that she had no doubt. Then she dialed the number of his colleague Kevin, who was filling in for Winston during periods of his absence. Never before had Jennifer called Kevin on her own just for fun. If Winston found out about his wife's all behavior now, he would clearly be displeased. Jennifer, hello. Kevin's voice sounded soft and good-natured. What happened to Winston? I can't get him on the phone. Is there a problem with his connection in Boston? Jennifer clutched the phone tightly in her hand, feeling her fingers ache with tension. Boston? Kevin's voice sounded surprised now. Had he gone to Boston? As far as I know, your husband went to stay with his parents in Chicago. He told me his father was sick, so he took a week off at his own expense. Winston visits his father a lot. I mean, he lives alone, he gets sick a lot. Or, Jennifer, am I confused? Jennifer was silent, ready to cry. She knew very well that Winston does not communicate with his father. John Smith had lived in Philadelphia for many years, where he had gone with his new family while Winston was still at university. This story was told to Jennifer by Winston himself, but he apparently had a different version for his colleagues. I'm sorry, Kevin, I'm on the phone with Winston, she said. I got it wrong. I must have been working too hard. She switched off the connection, then tossed the phone aside with a squeamishness. Of course, no Winston had called her. She'd made up the story for Kevin, who could easily guess that Winston was misleading both his wife and his colleagues. So all her husband's trips to congresses, conferences, and other business trips were staged exclusively for her. For his colleagues, Dr. Smith went to his father, while his wife was quietly waiting for him at home, even unaware of the double life her husband led. After a while, Jennifer's hand reached for the phone. Fighting her own reluctance to know the truth, she went back to her sister Bridget's page. Here was her trip to Hawaii in April. Winston had flown to Los Angeles for a fortnight, and Jennifer had been surprised to see how tanned her husband had been when he returned from Los Angeles. And it turns out that in April in Los Angeles is so sunny. I walked a lot. I did not notice how I burned, said Winston then. Jennifer didn't say anything to him. It did not even occur to her that her husband could be somewhere else, for example, in a hot country with her younger sister. And here was another of Maggie's trips, this time to the Bahamas. Winston was away from home then, too. He was supposedly on a flight to Denver. Except it was summer outside, and it was normal for him to return with a slight tan. There were other trips. Jennifer had counted at least 5 in the last 40 minutes. It had started almost 2 years ago. At least the joint disappearances from Jennifer's life had been observed since the December before last. And Ben had just turned 21 at the time. She'd barely graduated from university and got a job as a receptionist at a beauty parlor. But she worked there for just under 6 months. She quit in December, and then in March she and Winston were out of town together. Bridget chattered something about a new lover, after which there was another, then again another and another third. But Jennifer was not interested in her younger sister's private life, and for nothing. I wonder if she met only with Winston or in parallel? Jennifer thought. Did she have other men? She was still in shock at her own discovery. To have lived with her husband for so many years, and now to suddenly find out that for the past 2 years he had been lying to her, dating her sister, traveling the world with her, paying for her purchases, catering to her every desire. His wife had done his laundry, cooked his breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, and waited faithfully for him at home. Without a word or a hint, she never let him know she was unhappy with anything. Jennifer was comfortable. People like her were usually called patient. By morning, she was sick of her own thoughts. All night she had been thinking that she had to make some decision about her future, because she would never have a future with Winston. I wondered, Jennifer thought, what was the purpose of this marriage show? He would have divorced me and lived with Maggie if he liked being with her so much. He'd long since grown cold to me. Winston came home as promised on Sunday, happy and lightly tanned. He called Jennifer a couple of times via Messenger, sending her some meaningless pictures to put her guard down. She'd responded to him with something to keep Winston from guessing that she knew all about his cheating perfectly well. Jennifer prepared herself for the conversation, going to clear the air. She had to gather her strength to find the right words that would not make her feel ashamed. No, she wouldn't make hysterics and scandals. They would part ways quietly if Winston wanted them to. What do I want? Jennifer thought. I want to endure further. I am willing to endure because I love this man and would do anything to be with him. I haven't existed apart from Winston for a long time. I belong to him completely. I'm like his soulmate that would die if I was separated from him. Winston talked cheerfully about his trip, making up stories as he went along that didn't really happen. Jennifer listened to him, smiling and nodding, while she realized with every passing minute that she couldn't tell Winston that she knew everything. She couldn't live without him. She never got round to talking to him, and after a few days she calmed down and decided that she would not part with her husband. She loved him and let him have an affair on the side. It was easy to break up a marriage, but to keep it together was still a challenge. So Jennifer decided she would endure to the end. At the end of another working day, when she was about to go home, there was a knock at her office. "The reception is over," Jennifer shouted, but the door opened anyway. Maggie stood on the doorstep, and the older sister's insides snapped at the sight of her younger sister. "Why are you here?" Jennifer asked with whitened lips. "We need to have a serious talk," Maggie replied. Jennifer realized then that something had happened. Something had happened that was out of her control. Something she had miscalculated. What it was, she was going to have to find out from her younger sister. "I'm pregnant," Maggie said after a long silence. The sisters sat next to each other, carefully avoiding the opportunity to look into each other's eyes, and remained silent until Maggie said 2 words that turned Jennifer's mind completely upside down. "Do I have to answer something?" Barely moving her lips, Jennifer asked. Jennifer's insides felt as if they had collapsed, and her lips and tongue stopped obeying her. "Shouldn't I?" Maggie replied shortly. "I'm the one who has to tell you. I'm pregnant by Winston, your husband. I'm tired of hiding the fact that I've been with him for a long time." Jennifer was silent. She fumbled with a piece of paper that had appeared on her desk. She couldn't say anything. It was like her tongue was stuck to her mouth. "Can you hear me?" Maggie asked demandingly. "I'm expecting your husband's child. I've been sleeping with him for a long time. A fortnight ago, he and I were on holiday in Miami, and before that we had sex at your house. Remember that spontaneous dinner at your place? You came over and told me to get my suitcase and you were leaving. I did. Only before that, I slept with your husband in your marital bed." The words were harsh, and Jennifer felt completely embarrassed by the filth. She didn't feel like it. She had tried to save her marriage to the last. Except who wanted it? Nobody. The child needed a father, no matter how immoral the child had been conceived. He was not to blame for his mother's recklessness, for his father's uncontrolled behavior. "What do you want from me?" Jennifer asked dryly. "For me to congratulate you? That I run home and scandalize my husband? That I look at myself in the mirror and try to see horns on my head?" Jennifer was about to scream, but Maggie, sitting across from her, kept her composure. Yes, that young woman had a lot of composure. She'd been scolded so many times by her parents, her grandmother, her teachers. Maggie didn't care about any of that. She had a way of keeping her cool, and that made Jennifer even more annoyed. "I want you to know the truth," Maggie said and stood up. "What you're going to do next, I don't know." "But I do," Jennifer said through gritted teeth. She left, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume. Jennifer thought about it and breathed in the air, realizing that she had often smelled it on her husband's shirts, the same shirts that her younger sister Maggie must have helped him buy. Everything in her family wasn't real her husband's love, the family idol, the way they lived together. So there was no happiness in the Winston household. Then why did they waste their time on each other? Returning home after work, Jennifer caught Winston there. Quickly gathering the necessary clothes into her suitcase, she put her books, laptop, and tablet in there as well. Then she closed it and sat down next to it on the bed. Covering her eyes, she tried to listen to herself and her sensations. What did she feel? Fear, resentment, hurt, disappointment. The last was perhaps the most vivid feeling. It was disappointment that Jennifer felt at losing her fake family. It was only an imitation of happiness, so it was necessary to leave without regret. Taking a piece of paper, Jennifer wrote a short note to Winston in the quick handwriting she had become accustomed to during her years at the clinic. "I know all about you and Maggie. I see no point in staying in this house. I will divorce you myself. We have nothing to share. Let's part amicably." There were no other words that came to mind. Jennifer did not write a long speech, but simply picked up her suitcase and left the flat. She took one last look at the wedding photograph hanging on the living room wall, where she and Winston were smiling broadly and happily, and got into the car. Their happiness was still real then. Jennifer calmly drove out of the city, refueled, and drove down the motorway. There were more than 300 kilometers to go. Staring into the darkness, she tried to remain calm and composed. Around 5 a.m., she was near a village with no streetlights, but a crumbling sign at the entrance and something that looked like a monument to chicken pox. Pulling over, Jennifer got out of the car, breathed in the fresh country air, and finally let the tears flow. For the 5 hours that Jennifer had been on the road, she had managed to remain calm and confident. But the village had turned her inside out. Standing in the darkness and the rain that had begun to fall, she felt endlessly tired and homesick. "Pull yourself together," she commanded herself, and then settled back behind the wheel and drove towards home. The house Jennifer stopped the car at had once belonged to her grandmother Julia, the mother of her father and Aunt Maggie. All her life, her grandmother had lived in this village 50 kilometers from her hometown. Several times she visited her son and his family, but she herself did not go anywhere further than the village. While Julia was still alive, she signed over her house to her eldest granddaughter, Jennifer. Maggie, learning of this then, took great offense at her sister. "You always get the best of everything," she cried with tears in her voice. and the best room and clothes. Now grandmother's house too. My God, Maggie, don't scream. Marian then cringed at her youngest daughter's loud, hysterical scream. It's a house in the middle of nowhere. What do you want it for? No one has bought anything in this village for a long time, so you wouldn't get any benefit even if your grandmother wrote the house in your name. What's that got to do with it? Maggie smeared tears down her face. How am I any worse than Jennifer? Why does she get everything all the time and I get everything on my own? Jennifer remained silent at the time. She remembered how many times during her grandmother's lifetime she had visited her in the village, monitored her health, went with her to the city clinic, prescribed medicines. Maggie had never once visited her grandmother in her entire adult life. Once in a while she called her, and that only to borrow money, which in the end did not return. But after the death of her grandmother, who left the house to the eldest granddaughter, Maggie took offense, as usual, accused her older sister that she gets everything for nothing, for the pretty eyes. Maggie didn't speak to Jennifer for a long time after that. The house, left after the death of Julia's grandmother, was small, rather dilapidated, but inside it was very cozy and warm. Jennifer, every time she came to the village to visit her grandmother's grave, stopped in the house with joy and awe, looking at the old crockery, photographs, paintings on the wall, small statuettes on the chest of drawers. And everything in the house was the same as it had been when Grandma Julia was still alive. As children, when Jennifer was 12 and Maggie was 6, they had come together to visit her grandmother for the summer. That summer seemed to Jennifer the happiest of her life, but Maggie didn't like it in the village. I hate goat's milk, and I don't like cow's milk, it's fatty, and I don't want to eat pancakes. My grandmother can't bake them. And I won't eat the chicken that has been running around since morning. I feel sorry for it. And I will not go to the vegetable garden. My nose will burn. And then there will be a trace. Whatever Grandma Jennifer offered, Maggie refused. She did not like country life. The girl thought it was boring and monotonous. But Jennifer enjoyed spending time with her grandmother. Most of all, she liked to go with her grandmother Julia to the collective farm, where she worked as a veterinarian. Perhaps it was from these trips that Jennifer's love of medicine was born. You have the makings of a future doctor, Julia said. Think about your future. You may want to connect it with medicine. Jennifer had made up her mind then. She would definitely be a doctor. She would help people. That was her calling, and she was happy with her choice, immensely grateful to her grandmother for her support. And now Jennifer was back at her grandmother's house. Only this time she came not for a while, but for permanent residence. There was nowhere else to go. To stay in the house where Winston was, there was neither strength, nor desire, nor possibility. Jennifer could not claim her husband's flat. It was his personal property. And she had no place of her own, for until a few weeks ago the young woman had had the assurance that she would be with her husband until she was old. But no, not all wishes were destined to come true, and Jennifer had experienced this firsthand. Collapsing onto the bed, she buried her face into the pillow. The bedclothes smelled damp, and the house itself, unheated and uninhabited for several years, didn't look much like a cozy nest. Jennifer had a lot of work to do to put the house in order, quit her old job, get a job in the village, file for divorce. But most importantly, learning to live a new life in which Winston would no longer be there. Remembering him, Jennifer picked up the phone. 15 missed calls from her husband, 2 missed calls from her mother, and 1 from her father. Maggie hadn't called her, and Jennifer bitterly imagined how happy she and Winston were to be together. Calling her mother, Jennifer told it like it was. I've left Winston. I'm going to live in the country. How, but why? You have such an amazing husband. How did you have the courage to leave him? And more importantly, why? Ask your youngest daughter, Jennifer replied, feeling a surge of anger again. No, it was urgent to pull herself together, to push away the anger, jealousy, and resentment. There should be nothing in her life that connected her to the past. What has Maggie to do with it? Marion didn't hide her surprise. Maggie is expecting my husband's child. In fact, she's been seeing him for a long time. Mom, let's close this topic. I'll buy a new SIM card tomorrow and this number won't be available. I'm filing for divorce, changing my life and my job. Marion was still shouting something into the phone, but Jennifer wasn't listening to her anymore. Jennifer was terribly sleepy. It was already late at night. She didn't want to think about anything. She fell into sleep. At her grandmother's house, Jennifer thought longingly of the next day, which would now be radically different from the days she was used to. In the morning, she woke up with her nose tangled in the blanket. The house was cold, and it appeared that the first snow had fallen outside the window. Jennifer was glad that she had managed to cover the 300 kilometers on a dry road. But she would hardly have dared such a rash act if there had been ice on the motorway. She had to do something about the stove. She also had to buy groceries and call her former job. Having somehow explained the situation, Jennifer listened to a lot of complaints from the head doctor, but managed to agree to send her resignation letter by registered mail. "You've really let us down," shouted into the phone head doctor. And Jennifer understood it well without him. Leaving the polyclinic without a therapist in the midst of flu and acute respiratory viral infections was unfair, ill-considered, and selfish, in the doctor's opinion. Jennifer did not initiate him into the details of her personal life, saying that she went to another city for family reasons. Having resolved the job issue, she dressed warmly and went to the post office. "Oh my God," Jennifer, the operator, addressed her, holding out an envelope and a blank sheet on which Jennifer was to write her resignation letter. "Yes, that's me," Jennifer smiled weakly, remembering how she and her grandmother Julia had once gone to this woman's house to watch little newborn piglets. Postal Service operator Rachel lived 2 houses down from the late Julia. "Why are you here?" "I'm here to visit my grandmother's grave." "And why would you write a letter?" Jennifer sighed. Now she would have to get used to a new life where everyone and everything had to know everything. That was what village life was like, and there was nothing Jennifer could do about it. Jennifer guessed that after her visit to the post office, news of her arrival would spread throughout the village. "I'm going to live here," she decided that it was better to tell the truth at once than to answer a million more questions from the villagers. There were about 200 people living in the village. All of them had known the late Julia, and Jennifer herself might have to meet them all. Some she knew and remembered, some she had yet to make acquaintance with. Live Rachel's face stretched. "Why's that?" "You didn't fit in at the regional center." "No, it didn't," Jennifer sighed. "And we've got a paramedic about to retire." Now Rachel's face lit up with a happy smile. "Listen, you're a doctor. Why don't you come down to the paramedic station and talk to Sharon? She's just sitting there. She's almost 70 years old. She should be looking after her own health, not treating the villagers." Jennifer nodded, not really thinking about working at the paramedic station. In fact, she was more inclined to think about working in a nearby town that would have its own clinic. "Rachel, do you know who can help me with the cooker? I don't know how to use it. It's very cold in the house." "Is that what city folk mean?" Rachel grinned. "I think my Oliver can help you too." "Oliver?" Jennifer tried to remember a certain Oliver, but to no avail. "Yes, my son. He's just visiting me right now. He came back from his shift, and instead of going to his place, he's staying with me for the time being. Either he had a fight with his wife, or he just doesn't want to go home. Anyway, come to my place. He was supposed to chop wood today. And he'll give you some wood and help you with the stove." Jennifer thanked her neighbor and almost ran to her house. The thought of returning to a house that looked more like a huge glacier did not please her at all. "I don't want to fall down in these parts," Jennifer thought. "There are no proper hospitals here, No way to get a full checkup. Oliver was home. When Jennifer saw him through the fence, she didn't immediately recognize him as the boy she had once run to the river with. They had been 14 years old then. The boy seemed overly bold and brave, and he was a real bully. "And I recognized you straight away," Oliver smiled. "Remember when you almost drowned? And I saved you." Jennifer laughed. "I didn't drown. You didn't save me? You pushed me into the river yourself. But now you could very well save me. My cooker doesn't work in my house, and I have no idea how to use it. Will you help me?" Oliver agreed. Together they worked out how to use the cooker properly. Then they drank tea, laughing and reminiscing about their childhood and their childhood mischief. Afterwards, they discussed mutual acquaintances, about whose fate Oliver knew much more than Jennifer, who had lived in the regional center for a long time. Then the topic drifted to a discussion of her own personal life. Jennifer didn't go into details, only briefly told him that she had left her husband and would now try to start a new life. "But you're a risk-taker," Oliver said admiringly. "To take a sudden change like that, I don't think I'm capable of that at all." "You don't know the details, that's why you think that way," Jennifer replied sadly. Before she knew it, she was talking to her childhood friend, and they sat there until lunchtime. The house was warm and cozy, and she didn't want to stop talking to such an interesting person. Jennifer suddenly realized that over the many years she had been married to Winston, she had completely forgotten what long, intimate conversations were like. After all, in the last few years, Winston was always busy. He had neither the time nor the inclination to talk to his wife. He must have discussed all the interesting things with Maggie, Jennifer thought bitterly, sinking back into her sad thoughts. "And why are you stuck at your mother's? Why aren't you going home?" Jennifer asked Oliver to distract herself from the realization of the worthlessness of her past life. Oliver shrugged. "Honestly, I'm afraid to. My wife recently had a baby and I don't feel like I can handle it." Jennifer raised her eyebrows in surprise. "You're afraid you won't be able to handle your own child? Are you serious?" Oliver nodded. "Seriously. Why? I'm a regular working man. My hands aren't made for this. When I pick up a pram, God forbid I drop it or push it. I'm afraid. Anyway, so I've been stalling. I fixed my mother's shed, rebuilt the roof. I'm thinking, what else can I do so I can go on shift right afterwards without going home?" "Oliver, it doesn't work that way." Jennifer shook her head. "You put yourself in your wife's shoes. How does she feel? What does she think about you not going home? Her hormones are already raging right now. She's having a hard time, not getting enough sleep with a small child. And you didn't even come and see him? You want to, don't you?" Oliver nodded, lowering his head. "I want to, but I'm afraid to." "You're a big man, and you're afraid of a small, helpless baby. Oliver, come on. You have a little brother, don't you? You spent your whole childhood with him, carrying him everywhere. Your mom almost left you with him forever. Nothing happened." "I wasn't thinking straight then," Oliver said. "I didn't have much choice. My parents made me do it. Now no one does." "Yeah," Jennifer grinned. "Did you ever think about the fact that your stressed-out wife is going to take it upon herself not to let you on the doorstep when you finally get the courage to do it?" Oliver looked at Jennifer, and his eyes grew wider and wider. "Why wouldn't she let me in? I'm the husband." "And where are you now? Are you the husband? Why are you sitting here? Not with your family, doing everything you can to avoid seeing your wife and child, Oliver?" "But she has every right to do the same, to never see you," Jennifer said. Oliver fell silent. There was nothing for him to object to. The next day, though, when Jennifer met Rachel, she learned from her that Oliver had gone to stay with his family. Packed up all his things dramatically yesterday and ran for the bus this morning. Thank God his brains are back in place. And that stuck out at my place. and at home a small son with his wife. Even I was embarrassed. Jennifer smiled and said nothing. As she walked to the shop, she thought about the fact that she might have made a husband and wife closer by bringing something good into the world. Now that she wasn't treating her patients, and she'd fled the city in disgrace, leaving her patients for other doctors, she felt guilty. The situation with Oliver at least redeemed that guilt a little. Entering the shop, Jennifer looked disappointedly at the shelves. She realized that village grocery shopping was going to be a disappointment. The shelves were lined with cereals, sugar, salt, washing powders, and shampoos. And it was impossible to buy the usual meat, frozen vegetable mixes, and dairy products. "What are you going to buy?" Jennifer was approached by a shop assistant, and in her Jennifer recognized her childhood friend Chloe. She recognized her with great difficulty because Chloe had changed so much. She and Jennifer were about the same age, except that Chloe was 1 or 2 years older. But she looked in her 30s and tails for all 45. The woman was clearly a heavy drinker. Her face was haggard, her eyes were red, and her hands were shaking, as if Chloe had drunk a lot the day before. "Chloe, it's you, isn't it?" Jennifer asked instead of answering, and the woman tightened her lips and nodded faintly. "Let's say it's me. What are you going to buy?" "I have a closing in 10 minutes, Chloe replied impolitely. "Ah, closing time," Jennifer grinned to herself. Behind Chloe's back, she saw an open bottle of vodka on one of the shelves, and next to it a shot glass and sliced apples. Chloe was clearly not going to close up to finish the day's work, but to get a hangover. "You've just changed so much," Jennifer said, continuing to insist and watching the way Chloe's eyes raced. "And you smell so heavy in here." "It's spoiled goods. It stinks from the back room," Chloe replied quickly, and then threw her chin up defiantly. "What are you doing here? Telling me off? Buy your food and go back to your place." "Rude," Jennifer said in an even voice, not trying to take offense at her former mate. "It's not my fault you look 40 years old. You have kids, don't you? My grandmother told me." "Look, get out of here," Chloe shouted. She ran out from behind the counter and forcefully pushed Jennifer towards the exit. "You're going to teach me about life. Idea girl, teach others." "Chloe, if you need help, come to me," Jennifer managed to say before the shop assistant slammed the shop door in her face. Having not bought anything from the shop, Jennifer decided that she would drive to a nearby town. The snow on the roads was already melting. She needed time to buy groceries and change the summer tires for winter ones. When she returned home in the evening, she noticed a female figure at the gate of Julia's grandmother's cottage. In the darkness, it was hard to make out who it was. But then Jennifer realized it was Chloe, the same one who had pushed her out of her shop back in the morning. "Let's go inside," Jennifer said, holding out 2 bags to Chloe. "Will you help me carry the groceries in?" Chloe obediently followed Jennifer in. At first, they sat in silence. Then Jennifer put the kettle on, poured tea into mugs, placed vases of sweets on the table. "Try some, they're delicious. I know they're very rare here. I used to buy them for the kids." Chloe suddenly burst into tears. Her shoulders were shaking, and Jennifer, silently watching the woman sitting opposite, got up from her chair, poured water into a glass, and handed it to her guest. "Help me," Chloe pleaded. "I can't stop. Since Ben died, I've been going downhill. I know I should stop, but I can't. It's like there's a force in me that makes me drink vodka. I drink it, but it doesn't get easier, and I keep dreaming about Ben and the children crying, and I can't control myself," Chloe said through her tears. Jennifer nodded. "Okay, I'll try to help you. Firstly, you're going to buy some pills in town. You're going to take them, and if you drink after them, they'll take you to the hospital. Secondly, they'll dull your desire to drink. We'll go into town together tomorrow. We'll make an appointment for you to see a doctor there. You should definitely do that. I'll drive you myself, go with you to the appointment, because I suspect you won't have the courage or strength to do it yourself." Chloe looked at Jennifer with wet eyes, nodded occasionally, and sipped water from the glass. "Are you really going to help me? Is that what you want? I want your children to grow up to be normal people, not afraid of their mother and not see everything that happens to you. You don't think about them as much as you usually do." "But you do," Jennifer said with a smile and handed Chloe a candy bar. "Take it, eat it, stay at my place tonight. You'll do something stupid like you did this morning and you'll be sorry." A few days after this conversation, when Jennifer and Chloe had already gone to the city, together went to the hospital, and Chloe was scheduled for treatment, people came to Jennifer's house. They all had different problems. Someone wanted to be cured of excessive alcohol consumption. Someone was worried about back pain. Someone in the stomach. In general, Chloe, who worked in the only shop in the village, encouraged after seeing a doctor and receiving help from Jennifer, told all the other residents about the dependability of her new friend and the fact that she worked in the regional center as a therapist. Jennifer never said no to anyone. And now the house of Masha's late grandmother turned into a kind of outpatient clinic. They brought her vegetables, meat, chicken, eggs. Someone tried to slip Jennifer money, but she took only food, and that is a thank you from happy old ladies who received prescriptions for medicines and learnt that they had no deadly diseases. Then Sharon, the same one who worked at the local health center as a paramedic, came to Jennifer's house. "Enough of this nonsense, Jenny," she said. "Did you get your employment history? Go to town and get you employed. I'm retiring. I've already written my application. And you shouldn't be taking people in and treating them with pickles in your house." Jennifer nodded. "Totally agree with what Sharon said." She was going to go to town with the paperwork herself, but Sharon beat her to the punch with her suggestion. 2 weeks later, Jennifer was taking appointments at the local nursing station. She often thought about her old life, but she had no regrets. She had too much work to do, which finally gave her a burst of energy and a desire to move on with her life. In the course of her work, she managed to file for divorce, then received a certificate of divorce. She went to the regional center twice and fortunately did not meet her ex-husband or her sister. In conversations with her mother, Jennifer carefully avoided the topic of her past life. She never asked about Maggie, and Marion tactfully left out how her sister and ex-husband Winston lived. Jennifer didn't know about it and didn't want to know. She guessed that both Maggie and Winston knew perfectly well that Jennifer lived in the settlement. Only neither of them had ever come to her, repented or apologized. In February in the township, as the blizzards began, they came one after another, and the local authorities, unaccustomed to such bad weather, were surprised that by the end of winter, this time of year was just beginning to gain momentum. "It's a wicked winter," explained one of the old ladies who came to see Jennifer. "It doesn't want to go away. It fights spring. We always have snowfalls in February, so much snow. It melts quickly, but it doesn't get swept away by the wind. Be well." Jennifer nodded. She still had much to learn about village life, which she was finally starting to get used to after a few months. The village was peaceful, quiet, and life flowed at a measured pace. Jennifer liked her job, and now she knew everyone in the small village. "Thank you, Julia," they often said to her, referring to her grandmother. "Raised such a wonderful granddaughter. A pleasure to us all." Jennifer smiled modestly, not commenting on the patient's words. It did make her happy to know that her grandmother spoke so well of her. It meant she had lived a life worth living. One snowstorm, Jennifer left work early. The patients were gone, and a real snowstorm was brewing outside her window. After closing the nurse's station, Jennifer trudged through the snowdrifts towards her home. As she approached, she noticed the open gate, but thought that it had opened because of strong gusts of wind. However, as she stepped up onto the porch, she saw the door to the house open. What the hell is that, she muttered as she approached the door, and then noticed a man's boots at the entrance. Her heart sank. As if in slow motion, she walked into the house and saw Winston sitting at the table. Turning around, he looked at her with an intimidated look, then gave her a strained smile. "Sorry, I'm uninvited." And Jennifer stopped in the doorway and leaned helplessly with her back against the door. It was unclear whether her strength had left her from the arduous journey home or because of her ex-husband's arrival. "Why did you come?" With difficulty moving her lips, she asked. "I came to beg forgiveness," he replied, rising from his chair. "I wanted to come sooner, but I lacked courage. Forgive me." Outside the window, the elements raged. Jennifer wanted to push Winston out the door, to slam the door in his face as Chloe had once done to her. But the blizzard was too frightening, and she wouldn't dare throw a man out into the weather and put his life in danger. Even if she very much wanted to hurt someone who had once hurt herself. "I forgave you long ago," Jennifer replied. "I've already forgotten about everything, and I advise you to forget about everything. Live happily ever after," Jennifer said. "I even left myself to give you the opportunity to be a happy husband and father of your child." "Maggie is not pregnant by me," Winston replied. "I can't have children. All these years I haven't told you the truth. My first wife left me for that reason, and I was afraid of losing you, so I kept quiet. Maggie's pregnancy, by which she wanted to keep me, was a consequence of her frivolous life." Jennifer grinned. "You chose that girl, now take responsibility for it yourself. I don't want to know anything." Winston approached Jennifer and tried to take her hands, but she took a step backwards. Then he suddenly dropped to his knees, lowering his head and holding out his hands to his ex-wife. Jennifer cringed, seeing the pathetic picture before her. How many times had she imagined Winston begging her forgiveness? But now this moment had come, and she felt nothing but squeamishness and a desire to end this spectacle as soon as possible. "Come on, get off your knees, it won't do you any good," she said. "I realized exactly why you were here today. You took advantage of the bad weather so I couldn't kick you out, but it won't help you." Winston lifted his head and looked into her face. "Do you really like this life? Do you like living in the township, socializing with these uneducated and miserable people? You are a doctor with a capital letter." "Shut up," Jennifer interrupted him. "It's not for you to talk about how bad people live here. You're not known for your own integrity. And I could have been a doctor with a capital letter if I'd gone on to further study. You talked me out of it. Now I'm going to be a little doctor in this little village. I'm leaving. And I want you gone by the time I get back. You put the key back where you got it from." Jennifer walked out of the house, breathing heavily and gulping for air. It was hard to walk, the wind whipping in her face, filling her eyes with snow. But Jennifer didn't stop, stepping firmly through the loose snow. After a few minutes, having overcome a snowdrift almost a meter high, she knocked on the door of Chloe's house. Half an hour later, they were sitting at the table drinking tea. "So, did you really kick him out?" Chloe asked. "I asked him to go home. I didn't kick him out," replied Jennifer. "I can't live with a man who betrayed me once. If I do, I'll be constantly expecting him to betray me again. No, I can't do that. If my Ben were alive, I think I would forgive him for the sake of our children," Chloe said then, sobbing, and put her arm around Jennifer's shoulders, rocking her like a child. "We don't have children, and there's no point in our marriage," Jennifer replied. "Winston can't have children." After saying those words and looking at Chloe's 2 kids playing cars on the bed in the room, Jennifer smiled. She wants kids. She wants to live a happy new life where there will be no room for betrayal. It was necessary to wait a little while. And sooner or later, a big love was sure to appear in her little life.